on-stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
How can you cure a disease by treating it as if it were something it's not? Can you make it go away by shaming patients for seeking treatment? Common sense says no, but the domestic violence victims advocacy industry is literally banking on it.
HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen.
How many patients do you think would die if the medical profession did things the way the domestic violence victims advocacy profession does? Imagine going to the doctor as an adult with a clear-cut case of tonsillitis, only to be prescribed treatment for being a hypochondriac. Would your tonsils get better if your doctor told you tonsillitis is a childhood ailment and you're too old to have it? Would you want a second opinion? What if you knew the training materials and standard practices and procedures laid out in the patient treatment methods used by all doctors you could go to were written to presume tonsillitis to only be a childhood ailment? What if all doctors everywhere were advised to view and treat all complaints indicating tonsillitis in anyone over the age of 18 as symptoms of being a hypochondriac? Would you bother going to the doctor? Would you go to the emergency room if your symptoms worsened? What if developing tonsillitis as an adult carried a stigma of weakness or being defective in your culture because adults were supposed to be immune? Would you want friends and family to know you had it? Would you be worried about your employer's reaction if your condition necessitated some time off? How would you feel telling your employer you needed time off for hypochondria therapy if that was how the medical system responded to your symptoms? If it came with the aforementioned stigma, even if your condition was actually recognized, would you want to admit you needed time off for tonsillectomy despite being an adult? Would your boss penalize you or become biased against you for admitting to an abnormal defect or weakness? How much worse would all of this be if seeking treatment for tonsillitis during adulthood was seen as taking advantage of resources meant for children? Would you try to just endure the pain and sickness and hope you could survive it? Would you feel guilty seeking treatment? Would you be embarrassed if people knew you had? How angry would you be if, after going through all of that, you learned there were actually many people who developed tonsillitis as adults and everyone in the medical industry knew it, but was afraid to question the dominant narrative about it? What if the only reason you had such a hard time getting treatment and faced such a stigma over it was that people who specialized in children's medicine perpetuated the myth that people like you were abnormal and weak, so they wouldn't have to share funding for treatment with people who specialize in treating adults? It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Apparently not to some people. We've previously discussed the failure of intimate partner and sexual violence prevalence research to consider the experiences of male victims of these types of abuse. It's been a rare thing for such research to focus on abused men, and even more rare for researchers to do so without manipulating their methods and data to obscure, rather than examine, male victims' experiences. One of those rare researchers who seeks information without bias, Deborah Powney, has been conducting a survey on male experiences of coercive control, a pattern of behaviors in which the abuser uses various methods of intimidation, threats, and punishment to dominate and manipulate the victim. This is a continuation of her previous research on the experiences of male victims of abuse. Deborah has questioned the status quo among victims advocacy organizations which operate on a gendered narrative about abuse victims and perpetrators. These organizations generally try to shoehorn male victims into the perpetrator mold, and even when they do not do that, they approach treatment as if being victimized means a man has something wrong with him. They do not take either of these approaches with female victims. As a result of such questioning, Deborah has faced some opposition from feminist academics and people who work within these organizations, but this has not prevented her from working toward the goal of obtaining more information about male victims. By the December 20th closing date of her survey, she had received responses from 2,050 participants with representation from all over the world. This has provided her with quite a bit of information to analyze and share. It will provide a great tool for advocates for male victims because it creates a body of information we can use to demonstrate the importance of services that actually focus on their needs instead of treating them as outliers to a preconceived norm among victims and perpetrators. It's definitely fodder for a wider conversation about anti-male bias within the victims advocacy industry, as well as for conversation among gender issues advocates of all stripes. This week, HBR Talk will feature Deborah Powney discussing her recent survey on male victims of coercive control. The discussion streams on multiple platforms. You can tune in Thursday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern,
Which is right now. So, let me switch my little picture. I'm a bit off tonight, but that's more me
No,
than
Hannah.
anything else.
It's
I'm a
right.
bit off.
It's right meow.
Right, meow.
Right meow.
Yeah. Oh, you're lucky I can talk. I don't know about meowing tonight. As you guys can hear, my voice is a bit off in that opener. It's not as bad as it was, but I am a plague rat. So welcome to what? Oop! I ran over Lauren and her sound died.
I think your internet is sick as well.
Yeah.
Oh.
My internet probably is sick. But
Is that me or is it you? I can hear you, but you're like coming in and out. Is it me or is it you?
It might be me. We'll see what happens. Hopefully everything works out all right. But in the meantime,
This is weird.
yeah. Can you hear me all right now?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, good. In the meantime, hello and welcome to HBR Talk 163, an update with Deborah Powney. I am your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren B. and our special guest, Deborah Powney, to talk about Deborah's latest research and get an update on how the survey went, along with some other things that have happened. But first, we gotta do what we gotta do. Honey Badger Radio has a ton of thought-provoking discussions, and those thoughts are getting more provoked every day as we discuss important topics. We stream on multiple platforms. The only way the thought police can affect us is to hide our work. To find it all without political censorship, and without having to wade through a lot of social justice ideologues' baloney, you have to get that information from us. You want to hear from us more than you hear from them? Head on over to honeybadgerbrigade.com. Every show is featured on honeybadgerbrigade.com along with some great articles on a variety of topics. So head on over and check it out. We can't make YouTube give us fair treatment, but we can pick up their slack by bypassing the slackers altogether. And we can't stop corporate entities from engaging in political discrimination to prevent people like us from funding our efforts, but we can provide you an alternate way to support our work. That's why FeedTheBadger.com is the most stable way to help us out. Feed the Badger provides a way to fund our efforts without funding politically correct censorship. So remember, folks, information is power. We have it, they hate it. If you want it, you've got to go to honeybadgerbrigade.com and check out the latest feed from the Badgers, and feed the Badger to help make it possible for us to share the news and analysis you come to HBR to hear. And tonight, we have information you definitely want to hear, and feminists won't. But we don't care what they want. We're going to give it to you anyway. Are you all ready for this?
Hello?
Did I lose you guys?
It went quiet there for a minute. I thought I was left on my own.
Nope, but no, I was hoping that somebody would jump in.
Okay.
That's okay.
Well, Happy New Year. We're at 20-1 in the UK, and we're officially in 2021.
It's
Oop, Lauren? Okay, it's definitely at your end. It's not at my end, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I can still hear you, but Lauren keeps coming in and out, I think.
Crud.
okay. Can you? Yeah. It's extremely choppy.
That's weird. You guys having some inclement weather out there?
I'm gonna reboot. I'll be back, guys.
Okay, okie dokie.
Okay.
Well, in the
Well,
meantime, Deborah, can you?
I've
you
just
give us an
I've just
update?
cracked an espresso martini as my first drink of 2021.
Awesome. Mine's ginger ale.
Oh, well, that's because you have other things to take.
Yeah. So my fun update for the start of 2021 is like I said, I'm a plague rat. I'm starting out 2021 with the coof. So like I told everybody I would get infected. Didn't do it on purpose though. It was like not a self-fulfilling prophecy. It was the weirdest circumstances. I can't explain, but for those that are going to be in our after show, our patron-only after show, you'll get to hear the story. But my update is not the one you guys came here to hear. So we want to hear from Deborah.
Well, yeah, it's what I'm going to be going through tonight is what and I don't mean to be teaching anyone to suck eggs. But when in psychology, when we analyze data, we have two types of statistics. We have descriptive statistics, which talks about the sample that we've got. And then we have inferential statistics, which allows us to extrapolate that data to the population. And where we are currently is we're looking at the descriptive stats. So these are the information I've got today is just about the sample that we've got. But having said that, when I say just about the sample, it's a pretty hefty sample.
That is a huge sample.
Yeah, I mean, compared to a lot of the data that's out there, we've pretty much blown it out of the water. But I'm going to give a bit of an introduction to what coercive control is for those that didn't hear me when I introduced this on International Men's Day. Coercive control is a expansion, really, of what we traditionally look at with domestic violence. So when people talk about domestic violence, they're talking about physical violence. But anyone that's been a victim of sustained domestic abuse will know that it's beyond that. And actually, the physical violence is a really small percentage of the bigger picture of abuse. Now, coercive control got made law in the UK in December 2015. So we've just gone through 5 years of having this on our criminal law books. But it's quite a difficult thing to evidence and to police, because taken in isolation, the abusive behaviour can seem quite trivial. But that's because coercive control is a consistent and persistent pattern of layered abuse. And it's split into, currently as a definition, it's split into 5 areas: physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological, financial, and sexual abuse. And it's very much, as is all domestic abuse, positioned as something that happens to women and is perpetrated by men, just in the same lines as everything else as for the last 50 years. But the consequence of that is that A, men have not been asked the questions around coercive control, but B, that any of the questions that are asked are very much framed from a female perspective. So, for example, if you're looking at sexual coercion, it tends to be about rape. And in the UK, the definition of rape excludes men from that. It literally is the use of a penis. You have to have a penis inserted into an orifice in order for it to be raped. So they kind of say that women can't commit rape. And if you're a male victim of rape, it's only because you've been raped by another man, which we all know is bullshit. So what happened with this particular survey was that we'd obviously conducted the first one, and that had got a huge amount of data because it was a huge survey, not just because we had a massive amount of participants. As far as surveys concerned, it was pretty hefty. Because I think I explained before, I just wrote a kind of wish, if I could lock everyone in the world in a room for a few weeks, which COVID did for me, this is what I would ask people, certainly ask male victims. But one of the themes that certainly came out of that survey was the level of coercive control that men were experiencing. So, of course, I discussed that with my lead supervisor, which is Professor Nicola Graham-Kevin, who is a leading light and has been for at least 2 decades now in this arena. And she was also going through our government statistics, which had been released around the same time on coercive control, which again was also very much positioned about women, but never really separated out the genders, never really even questioned the fact that this would happen to men. And it's something that Nikki is really, really passionate about, getting this into the governmental forum. So because of that, we had a conversation, and she said, how would you like to put out another survey that is solely focused on coercive control on the back of the ethics that we'd already passed for the previous survey. Now, having said that, on the back of the ethics means that we have to then rewrite a questionnaire, make sure we're in agreement of it, and then put that through ethics, make sure that the ethics board are happy with that, even if we've put that in with the other survey, which we obviously got. And then, so in order to develop the survey, we used 3 specific areas. One was clearly the evidence that we got from the first survey, because we had that data and we had to use it. The second one was the fact that Nikki is a professor in this field of aggression, with particular focus on female aggression. And then the third area was to use the legal definition that we already have on the law books in the UK. And as far as the rest of the world is concerned, we're leading very much on that as a law. So we created this questionnaire and put it out there. And I was hoping it would do as well as the previous survey, but again, it smashed it out of the ballpark, as it were. And we actually closed, which once I'd closed the survey officially, the people that had already started a survey still had had 7 days to continue that if they wanted to. So the official close number is 2,086. And again, it represented all over the world. We, as what we're finding is, as we're building these surveys, and we will continue to build this particular focus, we're learning more and more about each new country that we enter. So we're now picking up different colleagues and people that are champion male victims in other countries, so that we can use them next time, because they're just suddenly coming across our survey. For example, in Poland, someone came over it with 2 days to go and really wanted to get it out there, but we couldn't hold off anymore. But again, when we repeat this survey, we'll obviously use them going forward and hopefully just get more and more participants. So do you want me to dive into the data now?
Yes. I was just going to ask, what are some of the things that you found out from this survey?
It's quite terrifying, but it's not anything that is surprising. And again, just to highlight why I'm so shocked that coercive control isn't used for male victims is because actually, when you do a deep dive into it, although it is very much given to a guy called Evan Stark, who's an American actually, he wrote a book about coercive control and positioned it about how men control women. But the actual model that he uses isn't one he developed himself. It was actually lifted from a guy called Albert Biderman, who created the model in 1957 from male victims of men that were prisoners of war, in Japanese prisoners of war. And so Biderman developed this model by showing how even without violence, just the threat of violence, but also all these other elements can be used to essentially break the spirit of someone, because they are trapped between their prison officer, who's actually their torturer, also being dependent on them for food and company and any kind of interaction. So it breeds this dependence abuser relationship, which you can completely map over domestic abuse. It's just that this has been lifted. All men that were used to develop this have been totally ignored, and then it's just been dropped into the dominant narrative. But just to give you an overall view of this, 36% of the men that answered this were still in their abusive relationship. So they were still having to deal with this. But as far as sort of recognition is concerned, they obviously recognise that they were being abused, which sounds bizarre for me to say this, but it's the first step on the road to recovery. If you realise you're being abused, you can actually start understanding that it's not you that's doing this. You're not going insane. You're not going crazy. You actually are being abused. How you handle it from then is absolutely another mountain to climb. But it is the first step on that road to recovery.
Did you have many who admitted that they were still in the abusive relationship because they had no pathway out?
Yeah, a lot of it was linked to children. So a lot of it was linked to the fact that if they left, where would they take the kids? They would be essentially walking out, knowing that, that having to fight for your kids is nigh on impossible if you're a man. So you're leaving your kids with an abuser.
And then, of course, the shelter system doesn't have a lot of spaces for men with their children either.
No.
I know the shelter system here in the United States is just as bad. They have spaces for women with their children, as long as, in a lot of places, if a boy hits adolescence, the whole family gets thrown out.
No, it's slightly more sadistic, where I've spoken to women that have been in these shelters that have said to me that they escaped the abuse and went to a shelter, but then because their son was 13, they had to abandon him if they wanted to stay in the shelter.
Wow.
And I can't think of anything more cruel for every single person involved in that situation. Because you've got a woman that's, and I'm only talking from a woman because that's who I spoke to about this. You're talking to a woman that has escaped abuse and is now thinking, "Oof, we're safe," and has now got to abandon her son,
who also escaped abuse.
Yes, but can you imagine being a son, a boy who's witnessed that and has witnessed their father doing that and feels all sorts of torn stuff, and then escapes with the mum and then gets told you're not allowed in here because you're one of them.
Yeah, and there are some things I can see. The boy himself might be in danger in some of these shelters just because they don't acknowledge very well the nature of abuse, so they don't talk about, for instance, women who are instigators, who abuse first, and then when they finally trigger a response, then they cry abuse. And so there's reasons to want to separate male and female in these shelters, but to just not do anything for the boys and to not do anything for the men is not a solution to that.
Well, one woman told me that happened to her, and she said, "So what do I do with my son?" And she was told by the people running the shelter, "That's not my issue."
Well, obviously they're compassionate.
I think that's cruel. I think it's cruel beyond belief. I can't think of much else. You go from one abusive situation to that.
Yeah, these people are supposed to be there to assist people who have been abused in moving on. They're supposed to be compassionate and understanding and helpful, and that's their answer?
Yeah. I mean, that's only one case. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure there are people out there that genuinely will try their very best to help these women. But this was one of the biggest ones in the UK. After the first survey, women were coming forward and contacting me via other people that they know, and literally telling me their story about this. One woman that was single said to me, if she'd have known how bad it was in the shelter, she would not have left her abuser.
Oh wow, that's
not helping
terrible.
women. It's hideous.
So it'd be an interesting thing to find out. People who have, because like here in the U.S., I know there's sort of a mixed response in the shelters. I know people who have gone into shelters, done everything they were told, taken advantage of the programs that were available to them, and moved on. And I know people who have abused all of those programs. And then I know people who have been abused and turned to shelters and found them no help at all. So it'd be interesting to see.
The problem I have with it is that in the UK, and I imagine it's the same in the US, because domestic abuse is seen as something that goes out to the charitable sector, the sort of social sector. It's not regulated in any way. So you can, and there are examples of this, which I'm including in my thesis, which I will publish in a book and get it out there. So you can be anybody. You don't have to have any formal training or any, well, I'm obviously going to be biased, any psychological training or expertise in this area. You can set up a charity, and I'm doing the inverted commas thing and with my fingers as I say that. Yeah. Apply for a grant from wherever and then start. You can just start, and then you can go and speak to the police, and you can go and speak to various different people and set yourself up, and then you'll get referrals. You can get a website and do that, and you can start training people and looking after people with no experience whatsoever. Yeah. Now, I can't, as a survivor myself, I have no issue in telling anybody who's even interested that not only I had real PTSD when after my first marriage, and not just the marriage, actually all the stuff going through court and how long that went on, and various different things. I went into all sorts of avoidance and stuff. So I used to hate it when the postman came, because my ex used to drag me to court as much as he possibly could, and I'd be terrified, certainly around special occasions, and particularly around Christmas and my birthday and stuff. He took great pleasure in making sure I was doing something to do with court around that particular time. So my heart rate used to just jump every time I heard the postman pull up. And then I stopped. I didn't want to see the post, so I would just pick all the post up and stick it in the bin. Didn't matter what it was. And I started to recognize these were quite harmful behaviors. So I went to my doctor and said, there's a lot of stuff going on here. I can recognize this. I'm going to need some help. So I went for counseling, and I also took medication to help me kind of calm down and be able to do the talking therapy at an effective level. So my worry is that if you're just setting this up, which a lot of them do without any training and everything else, and I imagine that the majority of people set up these services with the best of intentions. I'm hoping so anyway. But, and maybe talking therapy or passing on information and stuff. But you're dealing with people that can have some really serious psychological issues here.
Yeah.
I'm not saying disorders or anything. I'm saying and they need some serious help. Yeah,
psychological
absolute injuries. And consequences of being abused. And if you're not trained in these things, how do you spot them? And then how do you deal with them? Because you could be pulling the sort of scab off the wound, and therefore they're bleeding, emotionally bleeding, but you're not trained to deal with that. What do you do with that? You could literally send someone home in a worse state as than they arrived.
Yeah.
And it terrifies me how many people have been injured. Or, and this is one of the other things I've noticed, and I imagine you'll agree with me in the US as well, is these women essentially are pulled into these services and they're not treated or helped to recover and thrive. They're indoctrinated, and all their anger and all their vitriol and all their pent up frustration and fear and everything else is turned into hatred and indoctrination rather than, and it's I mean, to be honest, if you're cult-like, which I accuse certainly some feminist organizations of, then you've got the perfect setup, because you're the front door where people are going to go for help. And you're going to say to them, well, it's all men. You're victimized because you're a woman. It's, this is exactly what we're doing. Hate all men, all this kind of stuff. And you're actually feeding any kind of distorted thinking that's going on there.
Yeah, and it's something that lends itself here, at least here in the United States, to profound levels of abuse, because they are cult-like. They're set up to fail to recognize liars and differentiate them from abuse victims. And I've had encounters with both. As I have a very close friend I went to college with, I've been friends with her since 1992, who, like me, she was abused as a kid, and she developed a pattern of latching on to abusive people for the longest time. And her last abuser tried to kill her. Wow. I didn't quite get into that situation with a habitual abuser, but I did get into that situation, not an attempt at killing, but I had my life threatened with a deadly weapon. So I understand she had some very serious mental issues from that. And she went into a shelter, and she went into a good shelter, and they helped her find psychiatric treatment. They helped her, exactly. She's the one that I saw move on. She's in a functional relationship now. That relationship went through some very serious issues, and they worked through those issues as well, but not I was going to say, I've also seen the other end of it. The domestic violence victims advocacy organization here in Dayton that helped the vexatious litigant in the 7 years in hell case, they treated her as a victim right up through the point where they became aware that she was physically stalking and assaulting the pets of, trespassing on the property of the person she was accusing and his family members, and trying to get information on his witnesses so she could stalk us too. Yeah. And she was still a victim to them.
Yes, and that's harmful, because that person, as well as you guys being and the guy involved being victimized, which is horrendous, she's also not getting any treatment. She's living a half life as a perpetrator, where there is umpteen perpetrator programs for men. However, the issue for me in there as well is that those perpetrator programs, probably have a huge amount of victims in there that have been transmuted through feminist ideology into perpetrators. But also those men that are actual perpetrators, it's not as if they don't know what they're doing is bad. They don't need to be told that you shouldn't hit a woman, because we tell boys from a really early age not to hit girls. And it's all based on the Duluth model, which is you might as well just sprinkle glitter and fairy dust on someone for the use it does. So nothing works if you go from that angle. But one of the main focuses in my thesis is recovery in male and female victims of intimate partner violence. So it's moving away from this victimization. Everything is going to be hideous. Even for women, you're a woman, you're always going to be a victim. And teaching people how to thrive, how to, I can sit here and say, yes, I was a victim of domestic abuse, but I don't feel like a victim of domestic abuse now.
Right.
I've done my work there. I don't even think I'm a survivor as such. I just described that because that's the language that's out there. That's led me down some dark paths. It's led me down some fantastic paths, and clearly it's led me to have this conversation here today. But it's not something I hang my hat on. Yeah. And I think that's something that certainly the feminist ideology kind of breeds into people, that, and you see the behavior very much on Twitter, which is a bit of a microscope, as it were, that people come on and say, as a victim of domestic abuse, I think this, or as a victim of domestic abuse, I say we do this. And I think, shit, that's actually become your identity.
The worst thing
you identify as a victim.
The worst thing about having victim as your identity is that you literally are stuck. You can't make progress in anything. Not just the psychological process of recovering from victimhood, but you can't, if you're stuck there, everything in your life is put on hold, because it's like being stuck in the mentality that you have a broken leg. I don't know. There's an old episode, of course all the episodes are old, of Lassie, where the dog is injured. She has an injured paw, and they put it, in a bandage, and the dog limps on the injured paw because it hurts. And the dog doesn't seem to be getting better. And they eventually figure out it's because having that bandage on that paw puts the dog in a mentality, I'm still injured. So she still limps, and she can't do anything because she's limping. They take the bandage off and put it on the other paw, and she limps on that paw. And this is basically what happens to the human psychology when you force someone or trick someone or coerce someone, which feminists can be very coercive about this. I've had them be very abusive and cruel to me for talking about having recovered from some rough experiences myself. Yeah. And like if I went to my doctor and my doctor said, you still have encephalitis, and I said, no, my brain's not swollen, I'm not in pain, I don't have encephalitis, I got better from that when I was 12. My thinking is I need a new doctor. If the doctor would get mad at me for being recovered from that instead of treating it as a success. But
again, you've got layers of identity going on here, because the other thing is if you identify as victim, that's literally your identity, then every aspect of your life is seen through that lens. So if someone gets a bigger slice of cake, you're a victim. It goes from the really trivial things. And you then see life as being really unfair. Now, life kind of is. There's things you can live the perfect life, as it were, be the perfect good person and do all the perfect good things. But we all know that life is a sneaky bastard and will come in from the sidelines and take you off your feet when you're least expecting it. Now, you can either crumple up and never leave the house again and see everything as something bad, or you can understand that shitty things happen to good people, and there are shitty people, but I would like to think the vast majority of them are just average people trying to get on with their lives. But feminism takes half of a population and demonizes them and negates them, and then actually sets a woman up for an almighty fall. Because if you're a heterosexual woman and you want to get into a relationship, you've had it pummeled into you, all men are bad, and men control women through violence because they are women, and you can't overturn that philosophy. How do you've become, it literally is biblical in the sense of, men possess original sin. How do you get over that? You can't overturn something that's absolutely enormous in those circumstances. So you either leave feminism, which is how you've built yourself back up from being a victim of abuse, and have to have your whole worldview shattered again, or you stick with the narrative and put yourself into cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. And that it seems to be like, when I look back at the 7 years in hell case, the abuser in that case saw herself as a victim. She convinced herself things happened that didn't, and then when she was confronted with information that contradicted her narrative, and her handlers from the organization were trying to, quote, help her work through the, quote, gaslighting, where she was actually provided with physical, irrefutable information, video of him being somewhere else at the time she made the accusation.
Wow.
That they were reinforcing that self-delusion. She was stuck in a mental pattern where she couldn't recover from that. If she had been an actual victim and she was having a combination of memories of genuine abuse and paranoid fantasy, because you get to a point where you expect things to happen, and if you're really, really traumatized, you can develop, like for a while with my experiences, I developed some paranoia with respect to things like stalking and harassment and stuff like that. And I had to work through that, and because you want to know what's real and what's not. You don't want that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
but she was stuck in that situation where she lost track of what was real and what was not.
Yes, and then that is propagated. It's fostered by those that are, this believe all women stuff. If that's propagated and supported, how do you ever recognize that your behavior is now limiting you and your life experience? Because every time you have that paranoid feeling, someone tells you you're correct to have that paranoid feeling, and it just leads you down a rabbit hole of suffering, really, in a half-life. But we've gone off on a bit of a tangent, so I'll come back to this. What was important as well here was that 60% of the men that answered the survey had children with their abusive partner. So often when we look at coercive control, it's about having a relationship or being in a relationship with that person. And what's often not recognized across genders, but obviously here with men, is that children are used as weapons to continue the abuse long after the relationship has ended. And of those men that had children, 95% of them thought that their children had been affected by the behavior of the abusive partner. So I'm going to jump into some of the questions that I asked across the survey. And we set it up in a scale of never, rarely, sometimes, often, and always when we ask these questions. And again, part of the issue was that we are looking at these behaviours being something that is persistent and consistent. So the numbers and percentages I'm going to talk through now sit in the answers that would have included sometimes, often, or always, because that gives us an idea that there's a pattern building at least here. So the first set of questions we looked at was, does your coercive ex or partner manipulate or control you by, and then we asked a number of questions. The first one was physically hurt you. And 57% of the men that answered this question said that it happens sometimes, often, or always. And then we also asked, which is often used in coercive control, that they physically hurt themselves, because often someone who's committing coercive control will use someone's protective feelings towards them to manipulate themselves. and 40% of the men said that that happened to them sometimes, often, or always. Threatening to leave you is always quite a biggie, especially in a committed relationship and one that includes children. And 74% of men said that this was used sometimes, often, or always. And again, a lot of these questions are mirrored in the guidance for laws in the UK, and are often used to describe the coercive control that happens to female victims. That's why we wanted to put them in, so we could have a direct comparison. And then we also asked, which is often dismissed by the dominant narrative, were you threatened with being reported to the police or authorities for something that you didn't do? And 66% of the men that answered this question said they were sometimes, often, or always. So that's 2/3 of men that answered this survey that had been threatened with false allegations. There was also something that came through from my first survey about threatening, frightening, or hurting children or pets. So we popped that question in, and 42% of the men answered that that happened to them sometimes, often, or always. So you can see that there's a pattern built up around physical threats and violence there.
And
we also asked...
It seems like people who abuse men, who understand how to abuse men, know that they can hurt men by hurting the people that men are protective of.
Yes, totally. It's using that protective mechanism in men, or guilt. So within this survey, we also left space for people to answer more questions about it, just with free text. And a lot of what comes through is that it would be very much if their abusive partner hurt themselves, or a pets. It just seemed horrible that they were threatening pets and children. It would literally be, look what you made me do. So and then what's particularly nasty about abusers that use coercive control is they are absolutely brilliant at making you feel bad for something that you haven't done, because what they're also very good at is choosing partners that take responsibility in life. They take responsibility for family, they take responsibility for children, and the abuser's very good at manipulating that. So the next question we went on to was, did your coercive partner or ex-partner emotionally hurt you by? And again, there's many more elements to this, but these are some of the few of some of the ones we asked. And again, these are things that are really highlighted when talking about female victims. And this is also some of the reasons why people dismiss coercive control, because in isolation, we've all done certain areas of these things, but this is about having a persistent and consistent pattern. So the first one is putting you down, and again, focusing on sometimes, often, or always. 95% of the men that answered this said that that happened to them. Humiliating you, which is obviously a lot worse than just putting you down. 90% of the men said sometimes, often, or always. Playing mind games. This is what we often refer to as gaslighting. 93% of the men said that this happened to them sometimes, often, or always. And then this was backed up by telling you you're crazy. 83% of the men said this had happened to them. And then something that's really focused on currently in the UK by one of the big three organisations is being threatened to disclose embarrassing or damaging information about you. And again, this is framed very much as a female issue. But we popped this question in our survey, and 67% of the men said that this happened to them sometimes, often, or always. So this can be anything from nude pictures to information about what one gentleman said, that his partner told his family and work colleagues that he'd been sexually abused when he was a child
it's
without his consent.
It's becoming, pretty obvious that a lot of the behaviors involved in coercive control, and a lot of what men in particular experience in coercive and controlling abusive behavior, is sort of parallel to what it happens in the Mean Girls kind of situation with the queen bee controlling social group, except that he's the target instead of another girl being the target. There's quite a bit of the same type of bullying that women engage in against each other, except that in this case the target is a male partner.
Well, it's really interesting you should say that, because the etiology, the sort of line of development of coercive control has been studied quite prolifically, and certainly by John Archer, who did the first meta-analysis that showed that women perpetrate domestic abuse at similar or slightly higher rates as men. And I'm quite fortunate that my supervisor worked on that meta-analysis, and she was trained by John Archer. But if you go back to children, if you go back to the primary school, I think you guys call it grade school, but the first kind of schools that kids go to, you'll see there that girls, where boys tend to have scraps and they get over their aggression in a bit of a fist fight, not just a bit of a thump and a scuffle, and then they move on. What tends to happen with girls is that they will go out to destroy your reputation and isolate you from your friend group. And then if you look at high school, we're all very aware of the analogy of Mean Girls, so that continues there as well. And then if you go to universities and have a look at that, you'll see that coercive control in dating couples is also prolific in girls, more so than boys. And then for some reason, it seems to be that it drops off a cliff when it gets into adult intimate relationships, where we've already got the etiology of this. We already know where it develops from, and it develops way back. And this comes from various elements, but in particular from evolutionary psychology, with intergroup competition, where women compete with each other for the attention of men. And as much as that sounds like a feminist nightmare, we're a sexually reproducing species, so that happens. But girls do it on a coercive level. They cut their teeth in primary school, continue it through high school, and then hone their skills as they sort of enter into the intimate relationship field. And then we expect it to disappear when they get married or get into a serious relationship. It's ridiculous. But that seems to be the way the narrative works. So one of the other questions that we really focused on was about isolating male victims. Because if you look at the coercive control model, isolation is one of the key tools of a coercive abuser, because they try to cut you off from your friends and your family and even work, so that you become dependent on them, in the way that I spoke about earlier on, about how a prisoner of war is dependent on their captor, as well as being tortured by their captor. So amongst the questions we asked was, does your abusive partner or ex-partner control who you see? And 86% of the men said sometimes, often, or always. So it's a huge issue. And then again, in the feminist model, the charities that in the UK that look at this say that women are often have their social media and their phones monitored. So we asked men the same question, and 79% of men said that sometimes, often, or always. Even giving us more details concerning that they had to leave their phone on the table in sight of their abuser, and they had to have all their passwords and codes and everything else to have access to their telephones and their social media accounts. And then also we asked about punishing for going out with friends or family. So did your partner punish you for going out with friends or family? And 73% of the men said that they were sometimes, often, or always. So this the idea that female victims alone are isolated is looking pretty ridiculous from the data that we have.
You know, there's a lot of this that's familiar just from my husband's divorce from his ex-wife. And the thing about not being able to go see friends and family without getting punished for it, that's one. Controlling, and the thing about controlling one's communications and monitoring, one's activities and communications, like, if you look, you can find online all sorts of talk from feminists about how creepy it is if a guy wants to see your phone, and how creepy it is if he wants to know what time you're coming home. Like my husband likes to know that I'm not dead on the highway somewhere.
Yes,
that's like, so that's not creepy. And I like to make sure, my family and I keep track of, like, here's where we're going to be, here's when to expect us back, here's when to get worried if that something might happen, But it's not abnormal for women to insist on access to their guy's phone, but not share access to theirs. And I've noticed how conducive to that type of abuse that is.
Yeah, it seems to be. I saw a snippet of a bizarre TV program a couple of years ago. It was called something ridiculous, like Dating My Ex or Having Dinner with My Ex or something like that. And it was just the trailer that I saw. I didn't actually see the program. But there was a young woman on there who was saying that the sort of pre-interview before they went on to do whatever they did, had dinner together or whatever, she was saying that he split up with her because one day, there was a lot of things leading up to it, but one day he found out that she'd put a tracker on his phone, and she couldn't understand why he was so pissed off with that, because all her friends did it to their boyfriends. And I thought, shit, that I would class that as stalking.
Yeah.
If you're tracking someone without their permission, that is not right.
Right.
And you seem to think that's normal. Is this some kind of normal behavior that's gone on?
And this is like, women will look in their husbands' wallets. Women will get into their husbands' wallets and take money and then tell them later or not tell them later. The ex used to spend up on the credit card, and for sometimes quite ridiculous things. And then he'd find out, hey, we owe $3,000 that we didn't know before. And it would be just out of the blue, and it would be for frivolous items and things that, are disposable, or, you use them, you experience them once and they're gone, recreational things. And then she'd get mad when he didn't help her pay it off. Or she would basically say, well, you have to.
That actually brings me on to the next section, because we asked about financial coercion, because, again, it's something that's very much championed by those that support the gendered model. We have a charity in the UK that supports economic abuse for female victims. And I asked the person that set that up, and I have no problem with anyone having specialist services for particular genders or particular religions or whatever, however you want to set that up. I have an issue, though, when you use that to exclude other groups. And so I asked this CEO, do you think that economic abuse is gendered? And knowing that I was halfway through this survey at the time, and you guys know me, I watch this data like a hawk as it comes through. And she said, yes, it's absolutely gendered. And I'm looking at mine thinking, really? Have you asked any men? And to give her some credit, she had asked men, but she utterly ignored it when she wrote a report. But that's for another time. But we asked a number of questions. There's some of the answers here. So one of the things that is often put forward by feminists is that women are prevented from going to work as coercion. So we asked men, were you prevented from going to work? And 45% of them said that they were sometimes, often, or always. So it's not gendered. That's almost half of the men that answered this question. But interestingly, what came up in our first survey was that sometimes men were made to go to work even when they were unwell. Yeah. So they were forced to go to work. So we popped that question in as well, which was, were you made to go to work even when you were unwell? And 39% of men said that they were, sometimes, often, or always, because clearly the woman doesn't want to work. She wants the guy to be the provider. So she'll force him to go to work even if he's sick.
Yep. And my husband experienced both of those things in the same marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, again, the rhetoric that's often pumped out is that men could leave any kind of abusive relationship because they tend to earn more money. So we asked men if they had their earnings controlled by their coercive partner, and 61% came back and said they were. So again, we're looking at 2/3 of men that have their incomes controlled and their earnings controlled. And again, some of the qualitative data that comes through said that they weren't even allowed to have a debit card or access to the bank account, even though all their earnings went into that bank account. So it's all very well and good earning the money, but if you don't have any access to it, you might as well not have any.
And modern technology actually makes that worse, because
it does.
You know, one
guy said that he's terrified of spending money because his wife has their account. I switched mine off because it was driving me insane, but you can have it so that every single transaction that goes through your account is pinged to you by a text message or whatever. And he said whatever he spends, if he goes and buys lunch, he'll go home at night and she'll say to him, why didn't you just have a sandwich? Why did you spend X amount of pounds on this or X amount of dollars on this? What were you eating?
I have that set up for the check card that only I use, and for the credit card that only I use, but I don't have that. We have, and this is typical in marriages, to have a joint bank account. And then I have a bank account that just has my name on it, that I pay our rent into the joint account from there, and then I pay some of our bills out of the account, you know. So every time I have to be very careful with those accounts, and every time I spend money, I get a notification so that it's easier for me to track. This is how much I have left. This is how much I before I overdraft.
But anything
use
like
that
that
to abuse him, that would be
exactly.
It would be so easy. The other thing is, I haven't brought home a physical paper paycheck in 10 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
With social services, for instance, if I lost my job, and one of the things they do, or if I ended up in a different financial situation than I'm in, and I went for unemployment, or I went for food stamps, or anything like that here, they want your last 4 pay stubs. And I would have to actually get into my computer, go to my employer's website, dig them up, and print them out, or e-fax them to social services. So I'd have to use electronic stuff to get access to that. And if I wanted to get into my banking information, I have to use passwords and go into the bank and that kind of thing. So a guy who is in like the breadwinner position is probably in the same situation. Most employers here, it's hard to find an employer here who doesn't expect you to use direct deposit. And if you have trouble getting a bank account, they want you to use other electronic forms of payment, like Green Dot cards and things like that. That's not the one, but there is a paycheck card they want to put your money on. And
yeah, well, most organisations are set up for electronic accounts anyway. Whether it's for stock taking or account, giving. Just my husband's self-employed, and he has all his electronically done that he just sends to the accountant when needed.
Right. So if your abuser has that, it's different from like 50 years ago. You could at least get a paycheck and run, but you can't do that now.
No, you can't. You can't do that. But and if it's monitored, so that she's got, or he, if it's the other way around, is pinged every single time something is spent out of that. I mean, can you imagine going to buy a sandwich?
Right.
Now, it sounds ridiculous, but I had this conversation with a woman I was talking through about. She was in an abusive relationship. She got out and she couldn't believe how it had happened. And most people that are subject to coercive control are people that would never see themselves as a victim and would never see themselves as a weak person. And they're not, because these people don't go after weak people. They go after really strong, capable, responsible people, because what's the point of going after someone who's weak and useless? Where's the fun in that, as it were? So
you're not conquering anything then.
Exactly. You're not achieving anything by crushing someone who's already crushed. So that's the first thing I would say of anyone that is suffering this, is it you're targeted because you're great. There's something about you that is incredible that they don't possess themselves. But this bit about concerning yourself with anything that you spend, I remember I was in a similar situation in my first marriage. And I remember once I wasn't in that marriage. I was a single parent, and I was working full time. I was okay for money and all the rest of it. I really struggled to buy something for myself. And the first thing I bought for myself, and I think it cost about £15 or something. It wasn't even anything stupidly expensive, and all it was a handmade coffee mug, and I really liked it, and it was quite rustic and a bit very much handmade. It was lovely, and I struggled. I think I went into this shop about 6 times before I actually went and bought it, because you're so used to being worried about spending money that it's almost something you have to deprogram in yourself. And it's really abusive. It's really horrible to think I'd like a sandwich, or I'd like to spend £15 on a cup, or in the grand scheme of things, it's only 15 quid, but it was such a struggle, and it really drives you into that situation. So the idea that a man, even if he is the sole breadwinner or the main breadwinner, can just easily have access to this money is absolute bullshit.
Yeah, and it's definitely it's one of those situations where people think of a man in a normal situation. Like, my parents always had a joint bank account, and they always discussed their purchases, but it was so that they didn't have a financial problem from overdrawn bank accounts and stuff like that. If my dad decided we needed a new camera for the business, he would talk to Mom about it, and they would decide whether they had the money now or needed to wait, and then he'd make the purchase. And there was no, well, you can't have that because I don't want you to have it. And there was no controlling over his finances. It was just, they were a team. But
I do
so
think
a lot of men think that it's normal for women to control their finances.
Yes.
They don't see the difference between working as a team and both people knowing we have this much money, these are the things we want to spend on, these are the things we agree on.
Yeah, and this isn't something that just goes from good to bad overnight. This is a drip, slowly, step by step process where, if it went from everything's fine and it's all a conversation to you can't even go and buy a sandwich, you'd go, excuse me. Yeah, but it's not that black and white. I can't tell you when I became terrified of spending money. I just know that I did.
Yeah. And see, I've been in the opposite situation where I had an ex whose parents did not teach him how to budget. And they didn't teach him how to use a checking account, and they didn't teach him how to handle a debit card and that kind of thing. And we moved in together, and we got a joint bank account, and he overdrew us like twice by
Yeah.
failing to understand that $5 spent 10 times is $50, not $5. So like we talked
Yeah,
about
but
it, and we went to
he
this.
wouldn't have done that. He wouldn't have done that maliciously.
No, it was
he
not
just
deliberate.
wasn't very good with money.
But we went into a situation that would normally be described as abuse, where I handled all the money and I made sure he understood how much he could spend, and then in the meantime, I was going through and showing him, this is what this is. This is how you do this. Here's how to write down a budget. Here's how you keep track of the check.
Well,
so
I
I
think
wasn't
you've hit
going to
on
have to
something.
do that forever.
I think you've hit on something quite pertinent there, because the next question that we asked was, did your coercive partner overspend or run up debts that you are responsible for?
Yeah.
And 67% of men said sometimes, often, or always.
Yeah.
Now, I think what happens if you're in it, then the abuser is a female can then go to an organization and say, he took my debit card off me, or he gave me an allowance.
Yeah.
And they can go, oh my God, that's coercive control to give you an allowance. But they don't have the full story.
Yeah.
Because if someone's running up debts in your name, then
That's
I think you're well
abusive.
within your rights to say, actually, I'm going to have to limit what you spend then, because we've got all this money to pay off.
Yeah. We're going to be homeless if I let you keep doing
Yes.
this. And
Yeah, because
like,
strangely enough, I remember my ex, in one of the many times I got dragged to court, actually trying to flip the situation and saying, she stopped us spending money. And the judge, I don't know where he pulled it from, he'd obviously got a lot of experience in this, said to me, can you explain this from your perspective? And I said, well, actually, he refused to work. I was working, and he was going out with his mum on various occasions and coming back with ridiculous things like these massive ornate mirrors and for like £200 and all this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, we were getting cards rejected at the supermarket.
Yeah.
So do you know what I mean? So, and the judge said, so you were being responsible, not abusive. And I said, yes. And that's, I was just fortunate that the judge stepped in at that point and
like,
asked me that question.
If somebody's watching, friends and family, and they're seeing stuff like this, one thing that you can note is, like in my situation, I was trying to help my ex, figure out, gain those skills, because he didn't have those skills, and you can't live without those skills. And I didn't know at that time that the relationship was going to end later, but I couldn't be his mommy. You can't be married to your mommy. You can't be in a relationship with your mommy for the rest of your life, right? No. So a person who's not abusive will try to help the irresponsible spender do better. A person who is abusive will want to remain an irresponsible spender.
Yes.
Or will want to control someone and treat them as an irresponsible spender when they're not. Yes,
absolutely. But then the other question we asked was, and this very much fits in with what you were saying previously, is refuses to contribute to household bills while spending their money on non-essential items. And 67% of men again said this happens sometimes, often, or always. And
isn't that interesting?
So this is a man, and I can hear the conversation in my head. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth because I've got enough words to analyze, but you can hear that. Well, you're the man. You should be paying the bills, and then going off and spending their money on frivolous items. So
if you look back at coverture laws, that was actually the norm. Women were not responsible for the household bills.
Exactly, the man was, yes.
Right. And now, under some countries' coverture laws, men could stop their wives from having jobs and stuff. They could say, don't hire my wife. But if a woman had money, if she had money from her father, if she had property and stuff, even though he was the steward of it, he couldn't take it and use it to benefit the family without her permission, and she could keep that.
And we have a phrase here, I don't know if you have it there, called pin money.
Pin money.
And it comes from way back when women used to sell pins to make lace with, and they would have their money. It was their money. It was pin money, but a man didn't touch it.
Yeah, there are similar ideas here. And the idea of a guy having access to a woman's paycheck is still considered abusive today, even if you're in a 2-income household that is, both incomes are responsible for the bills. Like my husband and I are co-breadwinners. When he had to pay child support, I was the breadwinner for this household because he was a co-breadwinner for a household that he no longer lived in. And these kind of norms are not recognized under like the old style. The idea of a woman paying the bills in the home is actually a very new, very modern thing, and it's very easy to hide that type of abuse because it's normal.
Yeah, and it's bizarre because you would think that feminism being what feminism is, that would be something that they would hold women accountable for as well. But it seems to be that they want women to represent 50% of the FTSE 100, but then they don't want them to contribute to the household bills.
Yeah, they don't want them to represent 50% of the responsible home ownership.
Exactly.
That's
again,
sad.
There was another question that said refusing to work even though they were able. So this was also taking into consideration that there might be women that stay at home and look after the children. So obviously they can't work if that's what they're doing and that's the agreement at home, or if they're poorly, or if they have an inability to work for some case. This wasn't that. This was refusing to work even when able, which is financially coercive. And again, I'm not saying this is just women that do this, because I was subjected to this as well. And 64% of men said that they had to deal with this. So again, 2/3 of men had to deal with this, sometimes, often, or always. So where's the equality there? And this is not talking about someone who's staying at home looking after the kids. This is someone who is point blank refusing to work.
Yep, and it's, again, there's a social norm that makes this easy to disguise. And it's easy to... The other thing is it's acceptable socially, where it shouldn't really be, that it's acceptable socially for a woman to expect to be supported in a marriage without... even if she doesn't have children to take care of, to just be the dependent of her husband. And
but you know. Go on, Lauren. Sorry.
Sorry. I just want to say, not even in marriage. I mean, we're talking about even in courtship.
True.
True.
Yeah.
It's they depend on men. They want men to supply all anything that they want. The food, pay my bills. If he doesn't get my hair or my nails done, then he's not a good man. Well,
be the sugar daddy.
Yeah. And when this is the foundation that you build a relationship upon, it's just subject to financial abuse. I mean, it's the very definition, if you ask me.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. And I've said exactly the same to my kids. I've got one of each gender. And I've said to my son, you respect a woman, you treat her as an equal. You don't fall for that kind of rubbish. There's a difference with chivalry and being taken the piss out of. If you want to buy a woman a bunch of flowers because you want to tell her you're thinking about her and stuff, that's fantastic. But it doesn't mean you end up paying for her hair and her nails and everything else.
Right. Yeah, like every week.
But I've also said to my daughter, you're capable of doing it yourself. And if you want to buy a man something because you're thinking of him and you want him to know that, you do that as well.
Yeah. Exactly. Like I know what it takes to maintain my hair. Right. So if I decide that it's necessary that I go to a salon every other week, or once a month or once or twice a month, whatever, that is on me. That's my responsibility. It's not for anyone to come in and say, well, no, now, if you want to be in a relationship with me, then you have to then maintain my lifestyle. I'm sorry, but they want men to come to the table with all of these things. Yet there's
do you not think that level of expectation is what we see this the feminists bash on about emotional and labor, and we do more housework and we do more this. I got really pissed off just before Christmas on Twitter with all these women saying, oh, we're going to hit real equality when men spend the same time as us wrapping presents and decorating the tree and putting up this and that and the other. And I'm thinking, that's your expectations, love. If that's what you want at Christmas, get off your fat ass and do it yourself.
How many of them have changed the brakes on their car?
Exactly.
Well, the thing is, there was this massive debate going on, and one woman said, well, don't do it then. If you don't want to do it, don't bloody do it. And this woman said, yeah, exactly. And then this other woman who was spouting about equality and men bloody wrapping presents said, well, then I'll get judged. And I thought, yeah, you'll only get judged by other women that think like you, because no man's going to give a shit.
Yep.
Yeah, I nipped that in the bud with my friends real quick. And my friends are pretty sensible people. I hang out with women who are, I guess you could say that I got a bunch of high testosterone female friends, because they really are, like I've got one mostly lifelong breadwinner. The friend that recovered and moved on from abuse, and I've got some friends who are very nerdy and stuff like that do a lot of things that you don't usually expect women to do. And when I talked about not wrapping Christmas presents, and they're all like, how do you get out of that? And I'm like, well, I want to spend more time enjoying the holiday with my family. So I go to the dollar store and I get bags and I get tissue and I shove everything goes in a bag and just some tissue on top of it. And then when I'm done, I take the tags off the bags and I put them away. And the next year I get the bags back out and reuse them. Yeah. And so then I don't have to go shopping for anything but that tissue paper. And almost everything I get can fit in a bag. And then the other end of it is, my mom figured this out when I was a kid. When we had this little golden book. We had a whole set of those little golden books. They had a little golden colored spine, and they had cute little stories. And one of them was about Santa Claus. And at the end of the story in that book, Santa Claus visits the last house, and he plays with all the toys. So we became Santa's last house the whole time that we all believed in Santa Claus. And Mom didn't wrap much of anything toy-wise. She set them up like somebody had been playing with them. And she and Dad had a blast doing that when we were kids. And then we would get up in the morning, and there would just be toys that looked, played with all over the Christmas tree. So we sort of continued that tradition, too. There were always some toys that looked like Santa had been playing with them. And so they didn't have to be wrapped. And that continues, even after the kids are alerted to the fact that Santa Claus is just the spirit of giving that lives inside of everybody, and which is a great transition, by the way. And because you don't take away Santa Claus, you clarify Santa Claus. Yeah, it's just a name for a spirit, and that my family had that going on for years. But and it worked very well, because my mom was very badly injured in a car accident we were in 1982, and she has 5 chronic pain disorders. She's had multiple surgeries. She's had a very rough go of it for her entire life since 1982, and she has worked full time. She almost always had at least one profession. She was a professional photographer, wedding photographer, did portraits and sports and everything, but she was also involved in local politics. She was on the Miami Erie Canal Society. She was involved in the local, when I was growing up, we were Republicans, from the second Reagan term on. My parents were Reagan Democrats. And so Mom was involved in the local Republican Party very heavily. She was on city council for my community for 12 years and was an ambassador to our sister city after having neck surgery. She went to Japan in a neck collar and did her ambassador duties in a neck collar for 2 weeks. So like she was very efficient when she figured out how to do things to keep fun in the family without having to deal with all this stuff that feminists, like, she laughed so hard at the idea of emotional labor. I told her what that was, and we made fun of it together for like an hour. It was great.
I can't bear it as a phrase. There's many that I can't bear, but that one in particular, they set themselves up and then moan about what they've set themselves up for.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do it. No, the only other people that are expecting you to do that are the other mean girls in your in-group.
Yeah.
Change your group.
It's all posturing.
So the other thing that we asked in financial coercion was about withholding contact with children unless demands for money were met. And 50% of the men that answered this said that happened sometimes, often, or always. So that's post-separation abuse, coercive control, because obviously they're held to ransom. It's as simple as that. That children are held to ransom unless demands for money are met. And I know many men in that situation that are literally starving, living on people's sofas, earning shitloads of money, but handing it over just so that they can spend time with their children.
Yeah.
And that's post-separation.
Yeah.
So it's not the idea that any level of coercion control, but particularly financial, because it really is dismissed out of hand when it comes to male victims.
And this is when that is almost unique to male victims. There are a few women who pay child support, but not that many. Whereas men, it's common for women to say, well, if you're not paying as much as I want, you don't get to see the kids, and not think that they're abusing the man and the children.
Yeah. I have a coworker. I've spoken about him before on the show, and he's a veteran. First and foremost, he's also a volunteer firefighter, but I think he's just like on. He doesn't actually go out and fight fires. He's like on like the advisory board or something like that. Anyway, so he went through a nasty divorce. I think they have 2 kids, small kids, very small kids. I think they're in school now, but very young. Anyway, nasty divorce with this woman. And so she has always made more than he has, right? So now, since the divorce, the lion's share of his salary, which he makes very good money, he's in IT, goes to her. And so, as time has gone on in this situation, he is now back. I think he's like living with her part-time. And the thought of the PTSD after everything that woman put him through, calling the cops on him, making up, just lying on this man. And he's still spending time underneath that roof with this woman, still paying her all of this child support, mind you, while she's still saving all this money, banking all this money, putting it away so he can't touch it. The government can't touch it and know about it. But and just so he can be with his kids.
Yeah.
And I can see it because, like, just today, someone kind of, yelled at him about something that he had to deal with, and it just set him off, and I feel so bad for him, because you can just tell that he needs a different way out of this situation where he does not have to deal with her. But though these are the laws in Connecticut, and he just has to it breaks your heart. It breaks your heart every time you see it.
Yeah, it one of the hardest things. I talk to a lot of men who are in the midst of the situation that my husband was in with his kids. We had to move in order to prevent him from being separated from his children. We moved we lived in northern Ohio, and we had to move to southern Ohio, away from both of our families, in order to protect that relationship, because otherwise the relationship, the contact was going to be severed between him and his daughters and our son and his sisters. And so we did that. But I've seen a lot of men go through similar situations where their ex-wife moves away with the children. Their ex-wife plays tricks to withhold visitation. The ex-wife plays tricks and works under the table and things like that, and lies to collect more child support. And like the one bit of hope.
I've heard women here say, I'm not gonna allow him any extra time with the kids. Because there's the child support agency changes it depending on how much time the child spends with the other parent. And so there's levels, and if they break a certain level of time, then their child support gets reduced.
The government being involved in child support, instead of like forcing the couples to negotiate that with each other and cooperate, that really facilitates that abuse. And the one bit of hope that I give men, I'm able to give men in that situation, is she can't do this forever. There's a limited amount of time that she can use the system to keep your children away from you, and there's a limited amount of time that she can use the system to rob you. Once that child support debt is paid off, she can't go after you for another dime of child support. And in a lot of situations, in a lot of countries, if you're on maintenance, I know if you're on maintenance in some countries, if his income goes up, her maintenance goes up. But at least in the United States, it doesn't necessarily, because you're only entitled to what you had when you were married. So now that's not every state. In some states that's different, but you can be in some areas of the United States and your alimony is set at a certain amount, and then he gets a better job. It doesn't necessarily increase the alimony. The judge says, well, you can get a better job too, because they recognize that women can work. And I think one way to solve that abuse issue with respect to child support and alimony and stuff like that is for there to be less government enforcement and more expectation that the woman will take measures to try to recover her earning capacity after divorce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I was chatting about this the other day, about how someone said to me jokingly, a friend of mine, that they found it really funny that I get all this crap from feminists, because actually the work I do, you would think I would be the ideal feminist, because I'm trying to tackle issues for everyone. I'm a woman that's fighting for men's issues, for as far as they're concerned, that it's only men's issues. Where I often say it's not. I don't focus on gender. I focus on the issue, and I'm not anti anything other than anti domestic abuse. But they often say that the patriarchy is systemic sexism, yet they run to the patriarchy every 5 seconds to try and change a law. So they've actually become the patriarchy.
Yeah, and they're the least empowering ideology for women. Like, you would think the best thing you could do for a woman who has been in a position where she is used to being dependent on a man, and then she gets divorced, the best thing you could do for her is raise her level of independence from him, because she wants to be separated from him, right? She doesn't want to be attached to him, and the other thing, dependence is a tether.
But the other thing that's really important for any victim is a sense of agency. And when I say this, not so much anymore, because I kind of squash it pretty quickly, or used to. But when I first started on this dark and rocky path, I used to say that and then get absolutely battered on social media about victim blaming and all this kind of shit. Now, I have to make it really, really plain that there's a huge difference between responsibility and agency. And you are not responsible for the abuse that's happened to you, but you have agency over that abuse not happening again. And by that, I mean, if you say to someone, if you work with someone who's recovering from that, and you go through all the elements of how the abuse occurred, because often a victim will come out the other end and not know how they got themselves into that shit. That was one of the burning questions I went back to university with. And so working through that and understanding that actually things, from my perspective, things like my parents had just a normal marriage, but it was a strong marriage. They took their responsibilities and their marriage vows very seriously, and their commitment to their family very seriously. So they had their ups and downs, but it was always going to remain the same. And when I got married, I also took that as a real commitment and responsibility, because that's how I was brought up. However, that becomes limiting when you're in a situation where you're being abused, but you're still sticking to your marriage vows. But so you have agency to be able to recognize, I understand that something that is actually good was not beneficial to me in that situation. So if that happens to me again, yes, I can still be committed to my value system, but it doesn't mean I leave myself open to abuse. Do you see the difference?
Yeah, it's just like there's a difference between pacifism and failure to defend yourself. Non-aggression is admirable, but failure to defend yourself in a situation where defense is necessary and right is not admirable. It's just foolish.
Stupid.
Yeah. So, there can be circumstances where self-defense would be a detriment to the situation instead of fixing the problem, but there's also circumstances where you have no other choice. You're going to die if you don't do it, and if you die for the sake of it, you're not a pacifist anymore. You're just an idiot. And it's the same thing with that situation. Yeah.
So, for example, when Lauren's saying about if she wants to go and have a haircut and all that kind of stuff, she doesn't expect a man to pay.
Right.
If you're in a relationship and you've been bled dry by an abusive person, it would be beneficial for someone to work with that person, or self-reflection, or however you handle that, to think, right, that was bad what happened to me, and I must recognize that if I'm in a relationship again and that starts to happen again, that's my cue to get the heck out of there.
Yeah, that this is not a good relationship. Not a functional
So it's
one.
not. It's about learning from what's happened, not blaming you for what's happened.
And this is a good way to put it. I think one of the most helpful things that was said to me in recovery did not come from a counselor. Because the one counselor I went to was feminist, and then the other counselor I went to was not focused on the abuse. He was focused on the obsessive-compulsive disorder, which at the time was more of an emergency. But at my church, I had some counseling at my church, and my counselor at church said to me, "You don't have to be helpless." And there was no more relief than I could describe, no more relieving thing to be told at that moment than, you don't have to be helpless in this.
Yeah.
You have things you can do, and you can take lessons from this and, strengthen your own armor. And, of course, in church, there was a religious aspect to it, and a taking advice from the Bible and praying and things like that maybe not everybody is going to appreciate. But in my church, when I was growing up, it was never about just let everything go and God will take care of everything. My minister had this joke about a flood and a guy trapped in his house, and somebody comes along with a motorcycle, says, "Let's get you out of here. Let's get you out of here." And the guy's like, "Nope, God will take care of me." And the water gets up to the first floor, and he goes to the second story, and some people come along in a boat, and they were like, "Come on, let's get out of here. Let's get you out of here. The flood waters are continuing to rise." "Oh no, the Lord will take care of me. I'll be fine." And so he keeps praying, and he gets up on his roof as the waters go up, and a helicopter comes along, and they're like, "You've got to get out of here. Climb this ladder. We'll get you out of here to safety." And he says, "No, the Lord will take care of me." And the floodwaters rise up over his head, and he drowns. And he gets to heaven, and he says, "God, why didn't you take care of me? I prayed and I prayed." And God said, "I don't know what else I was supposed to do. I sent you a motorcycle and a boat and a helicopter, and you turned them all down." Yeah. And that was like, my minister was very adamant about, the personal responsibility and the personal action and accountability and things like that. And that was probably the best counseling I had as a victim of violent crime. Was, yes, you can take care of yourself, and there are things you can learn from the Bible, and there are things you can get from prayer, but ultimately your experiences are going to be up to you. And you can't really get that in a lot of feminist counseling, because they get very upset at the idea of the personal control over one's own environment. That's very offensive to them.
Yeah. Now, I'm not religious at all, but I would class myself as a spiritual person. And one of the things, there's something I study called post-traumatic growth, and one of the elements in that looks at religion and spirituality to help you through not just recovery, but actually growth from all kinds of trauma. And one of the things that's really important in that is the ability to self-reflect. And any person that I talk to that has religious faith talks to me about prayer not just being something that is asking God to do something for them, but it's a moment of self-reflection, of being able to process and think through and try to find a solution. Now, that solution might come from prayer, it might come from scripture, it might come from understanding, because when I read the Bible, I haven't for a while, I must say, there are lessons in the Bible that are actually called lessons that are in for me, even if I don't believe in those as an actuality, I believe in the meaning and the process within that story of, like your pastor said about, I sent you a motorbike, I sent you a boat and a helicopter, and you still didn't do anything. Those are real lessons to say, however that help comes, it's up to you to take that step to accept that help.
And that line about not having to be helpless, like, I think that's one of the most important things that you can tell someone who has been victimized, is that you don't have to go through this again. You don't have to be helpless. Here, there are tools you can use.
One of the central tenet of domestic abuse from the gender model is that men perpetrate domestic abuse against women because they are women. Now, that's just ideology. And then what do you do as a woman with that? Because you can't do anything with that. How do you recover and thrive from that? I'm being victimized because I'm a woman. Right. No.
And then, of course, it allows them to dismiss the experiences of men who are victimized. And it sort of, it increases a level of helplessness there, because all of the places that you're supposed to be able to turn for tools to improve your situation are rejecting you. And so that whole situation, I'm sure that you probably have quite a bit to talk about regarding the responses you got from people who work in the industry and academics who basically perpetuate the patriarchy and toxic masculinity myths. And when you came out with your research, I noticed that there were some really heated discussions taking place on Twitter. I participated in some of the earlier ones. I haven't been on Twitter for a while due to my circumstances, but I haven't been on very much. But
well, strangely enough, this time round, I didn't really get as much of that because
you scared them away last time.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's not going to stop me. It only serves to make me think, oh, I'm on the right path here.
Yeah.
And it also it gives me more attention. It's one of those things where this wasn't always my career. I was in marketing and sales and all sorts of things. So there's elements where it only serves to drive me further. And actually, some of the stuff that happened has actually resulted in benefit. A backer came forward after last time. I was on an interview with Bettina Arndt in Australia, and a backer came forward from there who has given me a substantial donation to make a website so that I can put this data out there and make sure everyone gets to use it in a really understandable way. It's not just going to be like all the scientific papers and all the stats and stuff. It's going to be easily, you can glance at it in a second and know what it means, kind of stuff. So it's it just serves to highlight to other people, especially when those arguing against me don't come from an evidence base, they come from an ideological base. And my main argument with the gendered model is that it's scientifically corrupt and it stunts scientific curiosity. Now, I class myself as a scientist, not just because of the analysis I do, but because I'm really curious about stuff, and in particular, domestic abuse, because of my previous experience. And I think that having the dogma of men perpetrate domestic abuse against women because they are women stunts scientific inquiry, because it fails to take in so many other elements that contribute to domestic abuse, from personality disorder, mental illness, adverse childhood experiences, learnt behavior, trauma responses. And I'm talking across genders, cultures, religions, everything. There's no investigation into that. And therefore, there's no way you can effectively tackle domestic abuse for anybody if you look at one tiny piece of a very large and complex jigsaw. And as a scientist, what makes me really angry is when an ideologist who has done a gender studies degree and PhD, or focus completely on the feminist framework to analyze a very complex topic, comes along and starts threatening me, my career, my PhD, my family, whatever that is. They promote anger in women that have been abused, and they really fan the flames of my absolute rage at this, rage at everything that they stand for, because it's morally corrupt. And it's never going to stop me.
No,
it is never ever going to stop me.
That is the spirit of a true warrior right there. The more that they attack, the more determined that you get. And like, I know you had at least one kind of vicious attack from an academic. If you're able to talk about that one.
Yeah, well, strangely enough, I was sent something today that he actually spoke about it on Twitter today. It was just after I released my first survey, and I think you got into an argument with him. It was Michael Flood. He
I got
attacked my survey within minutes of me releasing it. I don't know if you remember.
I do.
Effectively,
I do. I remember that.
Yes. I was going to ask his name, but I knew I didn't have to.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't have said I wouldn't have said anything, but he was talking about it actively today. But he immediately started to attack my survey, and I wasn't following him. And in fact, I'd got him on mute, but I could see other people answering him. He was still following me, and it actually got to the point where I think you had an argument with him and kind of distracted him for a bit, but it didn't matter what else I was doing. I'd comment on something else and he would come in and start on about some gender shit or whatever. So I got to the point where I thought, I need to be online to get this survey out there and give people updates on my progress and give them little snapshots of the data and stuff. And I'm actually getting dragged away from that by this person who's clearly maliciously trying to, discredit this before it's even been conducted. So I'm just going to block him. I'm just going to block him and not even bother with him anymore. So I did that, and the survey went on its way, and we did it. And then once I'd kind of finished the survey, I thought, well, I'll just unblock him. I'm not going to follow him or anything, but I'll just unblock him. But if he carries on behaving like that, I'm just going to block him permanently, because it's actually not worth my time and effort, this crap. Because I don't agree with anything that he says. I think his research is substandard for what he claims to be an expert in, for many reasons that would take me a long time to explain, but I really do think that. And he has shown himself to act in bad faith. So I didn't really want anything to do with him. So I blocked him permanently, because as soon as I unblocked him, it started all over again. Within a week or so of that happening, a letter dropped into my email on his university headed email. And he's said all this on Twitter today. So I'm not saying anything that he hasn't recanted himself. Copying in. Now, this is someone who I didn't follow. I'd got him on mute, but he continued to follow me. He would engage with me when clearly he was just getting dismissed by me, continued to do it, to the point where other people were telling him that he was harassing me or he had some kind of weird obsession with me, and it was just getting out of hand, and that's why I blocked him permanently. So what dropped into my email was a message to me claiming that I had defamed him. And this was June-ish about this year. And he'd got screenshots of tweets taken completely out of context, of things that I'd said to him about, I thought he was scientifically corrupt. I thought it was an ideologue. I thought all these different things. Meanwhile, loads of other people are saying far worse to him, including the stuff I'm saying. Oh, I said he was a snake oil peddler and stuff. And so he was alleging defamation, and this wasn't just a personal email to me like any normal person would do. He'd put it on his university headed email. He'd copied in his boss, my lead supervisor, and my dean of school. Now, as someone who is a victim of domestic abuse, where the coercive control was often used by the court system, that triggered things in me that made me think, I've put my family through a lot of sacrifice and a lot of time without me while I've been studying and working hard and all the rest of it. And this person's actually trying to attack that, not because he actually believes those things that I've said are defamatory, but because I've now become a viable threat. Because the data I'm now having completely usurps everything that he says.
It's quite interesting, because I noticed that you didn't contact him. It was the other way around initially. And I think the initial contact between you guys, if I didn't see something before what I saw, what I did see as the initial contact, had you ever contacted him before he started critiquing your work?
Yeah. Something he was having a pop at someone that I work with that I class as a friend, and he was saying something about domestic abuse, and I clearly knew that wasn't the case. I can't remember what it was, and I jumped in and said that's not true, blah blah blah, all the rest of it. And he came back and said, well, clearly you're a researcher. And he was his patronizing self. I mean, seriously, that man is so far up his own backside.
I noticed that.
You know, he's patronizing. But what I've noticed is he has a pop at women.
Oh yeah.
He doesn't really engage much with men. I can give you an example where, do you know Helen Pluckrose?
Yes.
She did the grievance studies papers with James Lindsay and Pete Boghossian.
Yes.
Now, I saw Flood have a massive pop at her, say, you know, trying to discredit what she did. But as soon as James jumped in and went, oh, piss off, mate, you're not just peddling that shit again, are you? He didn't say boo to a goose. So it's clearly something that he has an issue with. But so I'm quite fortunate that I'm not a 25-year-old postgrad. I'm a woman of a certain age, and I know certain things and certain people. So I reached out for help, and I'm also a member of an organisation called the Freedom of Speech Union. So I spoke to Toby Young, who heads that up, and he got me some legal advice and said what you did wasn't defamation, because actually if you go on his Twitter feed, there's so much there that in defamation you have to prove that something that I've said has caused loss, financial loss. And the people that gave me that advice not only looked at the UK law, but they also looked at Australian law, and you wouldn't even get it into court. But I was also advised that clearly I'm very outspoken, and the work that I'm doing could be seen by some as controversial. So set up this thing on my Twitter that just deletes all my tweets after a month, just wipes them out, so that some gutter rat can't go through my tweets in 3 years' time and pull something out that, you know, is
out of context.
Yeah, and start to try and take action or whatever, which I thought was a pretty good idea. So the Freedom of Speech Union pulled together a letter with me saying that we addressed to his boss, saying essentially, this man follows me, I don't follow him. We've had many heated debates. Deborah does stand by what she said, but for the sake of putting this over, she'll delete all the tweets that she's got on up until that point. I have got all screenshots of everything I've had with him. So if it was to go any further, I'd be happy to stand in court and prove what I've said has substance. But actually, what I would rather do is get on with my PhD, get the data, and do it that way. And actually, when I spoke to my supervisor and my dean of school, they said, get your PhD, and if you want to challenge him in public by, you know, putting your data out there, and let's see and have a debate, because the data I have is important data. My school obviously believes that.
And the nice thing is he's not going to be able to contradict it, because there isn't any other source that he could use to do that.
The thing is, out of my school and my supervisory team are amazingly supportive, and out of respect for them, I'm happy to delete some tweets and crack on and get the job done. But from what I've been sent today, he's acting very smug about, and she's removed the tweets and this, that, and the other. And I think that in and of itself is very telling of the lack of integrity of the man. Mm-hmm. He could have easily written me a message privately and said something grown up, like, maybe this has got out of hand, maybe there's some common ground between us. Actually, maybe I've done a few things out of place, maybe you have, but could we get over this and have an agreement? And I would have actually respected him for that. But as it currently stands, I think I was right in everything that I said. I think his behaviour is, well, beneath me.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of those situations where, like, every research that does what you do, that being looking at the information from an unbiased perspective and trying to fill in areas where there's insufficient information because everybody's been focusing on other areas, and in a research environment where those other areas are getting filled in with ideology, and they're done so because there's a financial incentive to do so. So you're in a situation where there's always going to be some toes stuck way out there that you can't help stepping on. It's probably the best thing. Most people that are looking into this, is the best thing is to find ways to keep doing what you're doing and put those people behind you.
Yeah, I think I'm happy. As a scientist, I'm happy for anyone to challenge my work. And I mean anybody. There's men that have challenged me, written a challenge to me in this survey that have said you should have asked these questions, you maybe should have thought of this, you maybe. Yes, absolutely. But as a starter for 10, I don't think these are bad surveys considering where we currently are in the data.
Well, it's called a start, a first step. When you gather more information like that, you can do another one.
Exactly. And I'm happy to take that. I don't see me doing a PhD and someone else not having a PhD. I don't see them as any less equal to contribute to this as me. You know, there's things that I need in there for the hypothesis that I'm testing. There's things that I haven't thought about that need to go in there, and I'm happy to build that in. But what I think is unacceptable is a real concerted effort to maintain an ideology by utterly dismissing not only the vast amount of male victims, but also the lack of support for female perpetrators, the lack of robust treatment programs for male perpetrators, the lack of thriving and robust treatment for female victims, and ultimately the fact that children are being treated as collateral damage to uphold an ideology.
Yeah, when it comes down to it, it's almost like the domestic violence victims advocacy system between a lot of the organizations that are supposedly there to help victims and the academic end of it is more like the I guess the domestic violence grifting and perpetuation system. Since the problem includes a large chunk of couples in which it's two-way violence, and the part of the problem is that the taboo against hitting your partner is only one-sided instead of on both sides. Because that taboo itself is not bad. It's not bad to say don't hit the opposite sex. It's bad to tell one sex that you can't do that and the other sex that it's their right. And if they would just take a look at the problem of both genders' violence and failure to develop conflict management and the ability to negotiate boundaries growing up as part of this problem, and help train people who are aggressive because of that how to deal with things without aggression, and people who are abused because of that how to defend themselves and psychologically, and how to avoid relationships where there's going to be an aggressor, you'd see a significant reduction in the problem, and then they wouldn't make any money.
Completely. And it's one of those things where to solve this problem puts a lot of people at risk with their mortgage, because ultimately there's a lot of organizations. For example, a CEO of one of the big three domestic abuse organizations in the UK has recently retired, but she was on £220,000 a year basic salary without anything else. And to put that into perspective, Our Prime Minister's basic salary is £150,000 a year.
My God.
Jeez, oh Pete.
So this is, be under no illusion that this is an industry that's built on the back of victims.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, a pound sterling is a dollar in the United States and 37 cents. So you look at 200,000, you're looking at, let's see if I can do this right. You're looking at 273,000 United States dollars. To put that into perspective, an average housing price here in the Dayton metro area is about $60,000 to $80,000, depending on the neighborhood you're in. So you could buy 3 houses here in Dayton and potentially, have enough money left over to support yourself for a few years and pay all your utilities, your groceries, and everything for year salary.
Well, this is it. This is the hypocrisy of it, because a huge amount of that money would have come from via government and donations and various legacies from people that leave money in their wills and stuff like that. And I remember having an argument with a young woman on Twitter or Facebook, one or the other, and she was doing it for the right reasons. Okay, I have to give her that. She'd been in a relationship prior, and she'd obviously been helped by this organization, and she was running each day, or she was doing something, but she wanted to raise I think it was £360 or £500 or something like that. And she was going on about, I'd put something on their feed about how rubbish they were, and she jumped on, obviously really passionate, and said, actually, this is the best organization, they're amazing, they don't get money from here, they don't get this, that and the other, and I'm doing this, that and the other. And then I just dropped in saying, their CEO gets £220,000 a year, so all your weeks of effort doesn't even pay for half a day of her salary. And she literally just stopped. I mean, she was having a right pop at me, and I thought, you're not having a pop at me personally. You're raging against something that I'm saying, now you've got to go away and think about that.
It sounds like an individual who might decide that maybe that organization isn't the one she wants to support after all, if she's rational.
But this is the issue that I have when individuals that have been helped by these organizations, and I'm not talking about the sort of higher echelons of them. I think the majority of frontline service providers do it with good intention. But as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So again, speaking from experience, I had an IDVA, an independent domestic abuse support worker, that helped me. She came and sat into court with me, and she was absolutely a godsend. She was brilliant. But then there was an ideology behind her about, we support you because you're a woman and all this kind of stuff. But she personally was absolutely a lifesaver for me. So I can understand why these women that have been helped by these people completely fall for it. And then along comes me and goes, that's all bullshit, because behind that, they're perpetuating victimhood. Maybe not yours personally, but they're perpetuating victimhood. They're blocking other victims being helped. And actually, they're getting money from the government to then use to lobby the government to change laws that really don't help anybody in the long run.
Yeah.
So I'm causing her to reevaluate her worldview.
It really puts us in a situation of having to examine, like, what is it that young people are learning, in particular young women, because this is a female-dominated industry. What is it that young women are learning growing up that is different from what, say, you look at me with what I do here in the men's rights movement. if I had to do this forever, I would be sad, not because
Yes.
I don't like doing it, but because I want things to get better. And I'm not, like, even if I make a little money doing it, I have always learned to be a versatile person. So if I have a task at hand, I want to change X, Y, Z, and then I get that done, my instinct is to look for something else that needs done to work on. And I've always had 2 or 3 jobs. I've always been involved in, oh, there's a problem. Okay, well, what can I do to help? And it's never been a situation of, well, this problem has to stay so that I can continue to help solving it, because I don't know what to do next if once it's over. And I think a lot of these people, I mean, I know some of them are just flat out, oh God, I can't think of the word for, basically mercenaries, con artists. Some of them are, but I think there's a lot of people that get into that.
Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I want to make a living off this.
Right.
I do want to make a living off this. My issue is, if your living is made off the back of not solving that problem,
right? But see, as a researcher, you'll always be looking for new information.
Well, I want to take this information and use it to develop tools so that the police start recognizing stuff, that doctors start looking at stuff. We can work with counselors to develop different ways of providing frontline services for men and women that maybe don't want to sit across from another woman and unpick their entire stuff. The walk into recovery thing that was furloughed because of COVID, I think that will help male victims of domestic abuse. I think it will help men of all different types of trauma. I think it will also help a lot of women to get over certain types of trauma. So it's not that I'm just sitting on research for having research's sake. I want it to be out there doing stuff and helping people. And yes, I need to feed my children and pay my mortgage and do all the rest of it. But my intention,
it's not the same as not wanting to solve the problems.
No, and that's my issue. My issue is that if this was about them just helping women and, looking at all different aspects of that, I'd be absolutely fine with it. My issue is that they don't just do that. They're not helping women because it's all ideological based and not evidence based. But also they use their money and their power to exclude other victims, which is immoral.
Yeah. And if you look at the domestic violence environment, the whole picture of domestic violence, I guess you can look at it like you would look at the picture of heart dysfunction, heart conditions. Like, there's a broad spectrum of different things that can go wrong with your heart. For instance, not everybody has clogged arteries. I have an arrhythmia that was caused by the steroids I had to take for my asthma when I was growing up. And so my experience with a doctor might be different, say, than somebody who goes to the doctor who has had a genetic problem and a bad diet combined to clog their arteries. And I might get a totally different treatment. Some things can be remedied, and research has helped to find, those remedies and help teach doctors and medical teams and patients what to do to protect their heart health under those circumstances. And then, there are things I have to do to maintain my health. Never going to get rid of the arrhythmia. It's not going away. It's damage. It's physical damage. But it's not life-threatening, so it's not life-threatening as long as I don't do anything stupid. If I start, snorting cocaine and stuff like that, I'm probably going to die. But since I'm allergic to dust, I have no inclination to put things in my nose that are made of dust. It's not the same dust, but but anyway, the upside, or the upshot of that is, I think you can compare the two in terms of domestic violence and stuff like that. Even if the problem doesn't fully go away, with you finding solutions, you're living threatens the living of people who they rely on perpetuating the problem. Your living relies on helping give people tools to protect themselves from the problem, to solve the problem when it affects their lives, to recognize the problem and help other people who are in the midst of the problem. But at no point does it rely on the problem continuing in the same style and at the same level that it is today.
Yeah.
And I think I would compare that to the way, like, most of us here at HBR, we're looking at not just what are the problems in the men's issues community. We want to see, by giving the information that we give and helping people connect with the groups, around them and everything, the idea is to change the situation. It doesn't necessarily mean there won't be information for us to share in the future, or that there won't be things for us to do in the future if we get to the point where there's enough information saturation or the information changes and there are other things, the environment changes and everything. Each of us has skills and capabilities and land on your feet, kind of attitudes where we will move forward and interact with the new environment in the most functional and beneficial way possible to other people around us, to ourselves, and so on. And I think there's a problem with, like, not necessarily the flat-out mercenary types. Those guys are just mercenaries and assholes and everything. But there are people in the industry that don't have that capacity. I've seen it with a lot of them. They panic at the idea of the problems going away because they see their identity goes away. You can't be the superhero if there are no victims to save, and they see maybe their ideology. They're so wrapped up in their ideology that they can't abide the idea that things are different than they've been treating them, and then they also probably are seeing their meal ticket go away too if they make their living based on the problem not changing.
Well, I think it's one of those things where clearly feminism is an identity. It's a belief system. It's flawed, but it's a belief system. And one of the central, I wrote a chapter for a psychology book, and I went critique the Duluth model and all that kind of stuff. But I actually said that domestic abuse is held up as the poster child for the gendered model, because for them, it's an illustration, a physical illustration of the harm of patriarchy. Okay. So to topple that central tenet means that you topple feminism. And it's such a core element to their oppression and the power structure and everything about it, that it's not actually about solving domestic abuse anymore for them. It's about some little upstart or upstarts coming in and literally digging up the foundation of their belief system. Because if you turn around and start saying, oh yeah, at least half of domestic abuse is bi-directional, women do instigate 70% of domestic abuse. Women are capable of waking men up by pouring boiling water from a kettle on them. And when they do cave their skull in with a hammer, it's not because they were oppressed, it's because actually they're vile, or they've jealous, or they've learned that, or they've had a trauma response or a mental illness or whatever. It's just because they're women. You've got to tackle a whole new set of beliefs then, because everything you hang your hat on, even this bullshit someone put out the other day about women don't want to take over from men, we just want to walk at night with our headphones in. And I'm thinking, well, look at you, love, because you've got more chance of being murdered as a man walking down the street than you have as a woman. Mm-hmm. But no one wants to listen to that.
Men don't walk at night with their headphones in. Men walk at night with their eyes on the environment around them and their ears wide open.
Mm-hmm.
Like that.
Exactly. Again, this is about agency. I wouldn't walk down the street with my headphones in because I'm not a fucking idiot.
No. Men have to be aware of, and they learn to be aware of their surroundings because from the time they are little boys, they are targets of violence, either from each other, from older kids that are bullies, from girls, and girls. Like, boys grow up with this situation where girls will hit them or kick them because they like them and want their attention, and they'll taunt them. You can't hit me because I'm a girl, but I can hit you as much as I want because you're a boy and I'm a girl and I can get away with it. And so they learn to take a certain level of violence without fighting back. They learn to be aware of their surroundings in order to avoid violence that they cannot counter. They learn not to attack people that are bigger and stronger than them because they're going to get their butts kicked, and they'll get told, you shouldn't have hit that bigger guy. They learn to defend against physical bullies, and they learn to engage in rough and tumble play without treating it as if they're also being bullied by that. And this idea, girls don't understand a lot of that stuff unless they grow up in a neighborhood that's dominated by boys. Like, you don't learn to wrestle if you grow up in a neighborhood that has as many girls as boys or more. You don't learn to take a bruise to your face and go home, and when your mom says, did somebody hit you, you tell her what really happened instead of, oh yes, somebody hit me. They don't learn that. They learn that they can get sympathy if they don't admit they fell off the monkey bars, and they do go home and say, oh yes, so-and-so beat me up, They don't learn to defend themselves against boys that don't have a compunction against hitting girls because they're not raised in a more chivalrous household, or they think there's no adults around, they can get away with it. They don't learn to defend themselves against groups because they're always in a gaggle themselves, and so there's a lot of things that they don't understand about what little boys learn growing up. And they don't learn. There's a level of respect little girls don't learn because of that. That for your fellow human being and for the not threat level of another human being, but the capacity of another human being to have a threat level that is unknown to you. So you can be like, for me, I tell the story of the chick that was having a loud, obnoxious argument with nobody else being there. No phone, no earpiece. She was obviously nuts, and that woman creeped me out. And I crossed the street and walked on the other side of the street so she wouldn't notice me when I was on my way to work at night one night. Guys, when they're walking down the street, if they see another person, that person can be completely nonviolent, but they have to be aware that that can be a front, right? And they have to be aware if they're with a woman that person can be a threat to them and the woman that's under their protection. So
it's hyperbolic, it's just exaggerated, but it's fed by the very belief system that they're embroiled in. There's a belief about it that it just feeds fear. But there's just there was one more section to the questions that we asked about coercive control, which was sexual coercion, which again is often dismissed out of hand for male victims because it's seen as something that only happens to women. So I've only got 4 here, but there are a few more in the actual full survey. So one of the things we asked was, have you been threatened to make false allegations against you, sexual allegations against you? And 42% of the men said that this has happened to them sometimes, often, or always. So that's really flies against the data that is often, well, not data, the message that is often pushed that, false allegations are rare. When actually in an abusive relationship, we're seeing that 42% of men are saying that they had to deal with that. Threatening to have sex with others, 37% of men were threatened with this if they didn't have sex with their partner, which would be hurtful for anyone, but it does trigger jealousy. Withholding sex as punishment. There was a campaign recently in the UK, and I saw this. I think I've got a screenshot of it, where it was aimed at female victims, and it said, if your partner withholds affection or sex or anything else, this is abusive. And again, this is something that's dismissed for men. And 68% of men said that sex had been withheld as a punishment, sometimes, often, or always. The last question that I'm going to talk about here is something that, again, is often asked for women from the different perspective, but is not been asked of men. And we asked men if they were forced to penetrate, or if they're without consent, or their consent was coerced. 39% of men said it happens sometimes, often, or always. So that's over a third of men that are experienced what I would consider to be rape, but wouldn't be categorized as such in the UK.
You know, that actually fits right in with women's answers about their own sexual aggression. And it sort of goes right back to those social norms, like a sexually aggressive man is recognized as behaving in a dysfunctional way. And that's not to be confused with a sexually assertive man, someone who lets you know he's interested and puts his, what do they call it? Putting your shingle out, and say, hey, I'm interested. What do you think? Right? Versus somebody who grabs you and says, we're going to do this whether you want to or not. But a sexually aggressive woman is viewed as sexy, and it's presumed that men are always sexually receptive. And so it's easy for a woman to get away with forcing herself on a man who is not sexually receptive, because he faces a stigma for not being sexually receptive. And it's really, that's one of the social attitudes that hides this type of abuse, or protects abusers from repercussions, and prevents victims from getting help.
Yeah, I think it's I'm surprised that 39% of the men were able to answer this question. To be honest, considering, I know I really appreciate the level of trust I get from the men that answer my surveys, but I can imagine that's a difficult question for anyone to answer, let alone a man. Because for all the reasons that you've just stated, but it tells me it absolutely needs to be taken seriously. Each of these elements that we've talked about today needs to be taken seriously. But as a whole, what this shows me, and will be used to show others, is that men are victims of coercive control. And just because you don't ask men the question doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, which is very much what the current data seems to do. It seems to ask everything of women and then just assume that it doesn't happen to men, because don't ask, don't tell. And to give you an idea of how unbiased myself and Nikki are, after Christmas we're adapting this for women, and we're going to go through ethical clearance to get this survey put out for female victims, because what we need to do to ensure that victims get the right treatment is to look at the similarities and indeed the differences between male and female victims, so that we can start getting treatment that's specific for genders. And obviously there'll be crossover because some women will prefer the treatment that is labelled for us as men, and vice versa. It depends what you want out of it. But we tackle domestic abuse as an issue in and of itself. We don't apportion this as something that is only for men or only for women or whatever that looks like. We're looking at the whole picture here. But we understand that there's a huge gap exists currently for male victims. So we're going to collect that data en masse as well.
And when it comes down to it, it's important to look at both sexes for a lot of reasons. To take it back to that comparison to different types of heart conditions, I would not be helped by bypass surgery. There's nothing to bypass.
Exactly.
But a person who needed bypass surgery would not be helped by the the management that I use for my situation either. And
yes,
they wouldn't. It would be catastrophic if someone tried to shoehorn us both into the same treatment. And if you have somebody in a situation where their unique abuse situation means that they maybe need assistance in finding a job and establishing themselves in an apartment or a home somewhere where they can take their children, and then you have another person who doesn't have children, needs hospital care, and actually needs a preventative measure because the person's going to come after them when they get out. If you try to shoehorn those into the same treatment, it's going to be equally catastrophic.
Yeah, so absolutely. But in the same respect, what the bullshit concept of toxic masculinity does is we have to remember that because of the ideology that's led this, the vast majority of treatment and the vast majority of everything that's set up to help victims is for women by women.
Yeah.
So what happens is that gendered model then looks at men, where it actually kind of shrugs its shoulders and goes, oh, well, maybe a few men have been victims. But actually, the reason they don't get help is because of their toxic masculinity. They don't reach out. And what pisses me off is they've taken their defunct gendered framework and thought, well, we can't blame that because that brings the whole ivory tower tumbling down. What we'll do is we'll blame the men and say it's because of you. And what they do is they treat men like dysfunctional women.
Yeah, and that seems to be one of the bigger problems in pretty much every area of service where men are getting the short or boys are getting the short end of the stick. It's that way in the education system.
Yes, totally.
Aspects of the medical system, where feminists will say the medical system exists mainly for men and women are not getting proper treatment.
Utter bullshit.
There are
there's
many
a guy,
situations the other way
I think
around.
I think his name's James Nuzzo.
Yeah.
Forgive me if I'm wrong. He's just done a talk. He's done two, but I think recently he's just done a talk on Regarding Men with Paul, Janice, and Tom.
Yeah.
And he does. He's assessed the healthcare system and found out that the focus on women in medical health research is 10 times that of men. Yeah, a lot of times the what ends up happening is if something is genderless, feminists label it as for men because it's not uniquely for women. And if something is uniquely for women, then they want to say, well, it also benefits men. Yeah, so it's crap in it. But the thing is, they'll say things like, well, women weren't used in that particular medical trial, so it's only for men. And that's cat. It's utter shit. Because what feminists tend to do is take something that is either logical or protective and turn it into something that they perceive as being sexist because of those bloody lenses. So you can't test drugs on pregnant women. Yes, hormones play a massive part of this. Yeah. And we all know, all of us in this conversation, sorry for the men that are listening, but us that are talking, we know, thankfully not me anymore, but what hormones can do to your mood, let alone anything else. Even your cravings for salt and sugar throughout a month, and your sleep patterns, your energy patterns, all sorts of stuff. And when you're testing particular treatments, you need to have a level of stability. And that's not sexist. That's just the way it bloody is. Well, there's if you want number of things. Want to test something, you want to test something that's reliable, you have to make sure that your baseline is reliable. And clearly these people don't know their arse from a hole in the ground, because all of a sudden something that it has to be reliable and robust and tested, and also might carry more risks that they don't want to put on women of childbearing age, suddenly that protective thing becomes sexist.
Yeah. Yeah,
Hey,
and
what
especially
bullshit.
like feminists think it's sexist against women to protect their children. But
Yeah.
so when I was pregnant, I stopped taking all of my medications. I went through a process with my doctor to make sure, I was doing it safely. But I didn't want to have any drugs of any kind in my system. I ended up having to find a pregnancy-safe allergy medicine because, the baby needs oxygen. But I didn't want to take anything that might risk affecting the baby's health.
Yes.
And it's one of those things that, like, you take your prenatal vitamins, if you can keep them down. I went on a high nutrition diet because I couldn't. But most women, they're going to want their children to be protected. Most women are not going to be like, oh, I'm pregnant, let's go test out this experimental drug and hope it doesn't affect my baby. And then feminists talk about it like those women are being discriminated against. It's deeply offensive.
They never talk about the benefits of it. They never go, oh, well, all those men got tested for X drug, and actually that works really well for us. Yeah, and now it works really well for us. And it's like, okay, you can't. But this is what it's all about, isn't it? It's not about having an opinion and saying, but of course you might want to think outside of that opinion. It's literally, you have that opinion, or you are the outsider and you are incorrect, or you're anti-woman. Even if you're a woman, I can't tell you how many times I get called a misogynist.
Or pick me. I love getting called a pick me. It's like,
honestly,
sorry, thanks, but I've already been picked.
Right.
Or I picked him.
Absolutely. I always say, because I've spent 8 years of my life and thousands of pounds just so some bloke can pick me.
Yeah, come on. But and like I picked my team too. I didn't pick the team that feminists will tell you is popular. I picked the team that I think is doing the right thing, and I don't think they understand that. Because some of them because they think their team is doing the right thing, and some of them because they can't understand picking a team based on what's right, but instead of what's popular or what feels good. And it really makes for a very dysfunctional discussion between the two groups. But I think just from everything that we've heard, I think your research in the long run, they're not going to be able to just poo-poo it. They're not going to be able to discount it, especially once you have the same research that comes out regarding female experiences, and you can compare. Well, this is what happens when a woman does it versus when a man does it. This is what happens when a woman experiences it versus when a man experiences it. And so they'll have a body of information to dig into and everything. You'll still have the Michael Floods. The thing I noticed the most about him is when he argued with me, I provided links to a variety of sources of research and everything, and I provided links to articles that I've written because they had a variety of sources, and with the statement, my article is not my source here, the links in my article go to a great deal of information that you should look through. And got told, well, you're self-citing. But the researchers linked to in the article were not me. They were people that I, read their information and found it to be credible. And what I received back from him was all self-citation. And
if you look at his work, a lot of it is like an op-ed. It's like an opinion piece.
And I think what you're going to end up with is you'll have a division between, there will be some modern feminists and some people who are within the spectrum of feminist academia who maybe don't necessarily identify as feminists, but they have to deal in that in order to do what they do, who are going to look at your information and be more rational about it, and then you'll have
the
floods as well.
I often read feminist research, and there is some research out there where I think that is brilliant. You've only focused on women, but actually the way you've looked at it is really interesting. I'm going to take some of that and I'm going to use that when I research women and when I do that and stuff. Yeah. I might not agree totally with the framework that they've used, but the way they've approached it is really robust, and they've really asked some questions that are new and curious, and there's a lot of stuff that I will take away from it. I don't just dismiss research out of hand because I think, because that would just make me as much of an ideologist as them. But there are certain. My issue comes when it's an action that dismisses victims for no other reason than ideology, and that's where I think there's scientifically stunted. I think it just stops the curiosity of science, and I don't actually think that a lot of what is pushed out there is worthy of being called science.
Right? No, it's more cult mentality. I think.
Well, like I said, some of the stuff that I particularly saw him pump out to you, and in that example, was what I would expect of a literature review.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of it really wasn't research; it was just description.
Well, I asked him outright, what independent research have you done on male and female victims? And he didn't answer me. And when I asked him what makes you an expert in victims, he actually answered that he wasn't an expert on male and female victims.
Yeah, it takes a lot to get somebody to admit that. Just like I got him to admit that he didn't know why he was so perturbed and obsessed with your work. At one point he said, I don't know why I keep responding to her. I just can't help it. And I thought, that should scare him. But
self-reflection wouldn't go amiss there then.
Yeah, that should have led to some self-reflection. But what I was thinking about with respect to this is, because I've noticed that among feminists, the spectrum, the gamut runs, from what I've run into, from the hardcore radfem, man-hating, ideologically, not necessarily brainwashed, but exploiting the ideology types, the grifter types, and those guys at the end where there's no redemption in arguments because they're too dedicated to a particular narrative or mentality to even listen, to people who are on Team Feminist because they've learned somewhere that feminism is about equality, but when you feed them information that is factual and true and contradicts their narrative, they take time to consider it and they'll adjust their opinions on things even if they don't immediately adjust their worldview. And I think I think your work has the capacity to pull people out of a cult mentality that they're just starting into or haven't gotten too far into.
Yeah, I'm hoping that that's the case, and I do think I follow a handful of feminists that there's some things that we don't agree on, but actually when I provide them with data, they're like, oh, okay, didn't know that. Actually, that's changed my mind on that.
Yeah,
and they'll come back to me and I'll ask them questions about so some of them want female-only spaces, especially when they're talking about the trans community. Now, I have, I suppose, quite a liberal view on this, that I think the word trans isn't a bad thing. I think if you're a trans person, I don't see the offence in being called a trans person. I think it labels an experience that you've had. I still think everyone should be treated with respect and should be able to live with dignity.
Yeah.
But I also understand that some women want a woman's only space. So my argument in that instance would be, well, I think you both need to exist with respect and whatever, but you both need to work together rather than arguing about it. How are you going to solve this shit? Because you know, I'm capable, like most people, of holding more than one binary thought in my head at the same time. And where I am with the current narrative with domestic abuses, I don't actually believe it helps anybody, even the women it professes to help.
Yeah.
So, and it needs to change. It needs to change.
I think you've hit the nail right there, and I think you've hit the nail on the head a couple of times. You know, with respect to the trans issue, with like the TERF issue and the trans issue, I think the TERF issue is in part a result of focusing on the trans and forgetting about the person, and I think the trans-trender issue is also a problem of focusing on the trans and forgetting about the person.
Yeah.
Those two butt heads, and then there's a third prong there where you have a tiny minority of predators who figured out that they can use feigned trans status. They can take advantage of the experiences of transgender people to avail themselves of areas where men and women are vulnerable. And
my point is, both of those people, both of those groups of people need to work together to
defend,
get rid of that third group.
Right. And then, of course, you can't examine the dysfunction of the third group and how to... Because I think a lot of people who are in that position of being predatory and aggressive have mental issues that can be addressed, where they can develop a better way of dealing with the rest of society so that they are not predatory and aggressive, and that they have better experiences and they've stopped being a threat to the people around them. It's not necessarily in every case. There are some mental health conditions that are maybe incurable, at least right now, but none of that can be addressed as soon as we politicize the trans and forget about the person. And like the same thing is true when it comes to the abuse situation, because we politicize the gender and the gender issues and we forget about the person. Like, the more information we get, I think the more we're going to move as a society toward an individual person-centered focus when it comes to treating the issues faced by abuse victims and by abuse perpetrators. Just the same as we do with the issues faced by healthcare patients. We have that same, like, no two people's conditions are exactly the same, because no two people's spectrum of contributing health factors is exactly the same. So you have things that you can say, well, this is the norm with this condition, and most people will be served by it, but there's always exceptions, and you can say the same thing with this situation. So I think I was going to say, I think we've got a lot of information, though.
I think we have. Let's certainly put that out there.
Yeah, we've gone over quite a bit of information, and I'm really grateful that you've come on to talk about what you've learned in your survey.
Anytime. Thanks for letting me go on about it.
Well, I'm excited to hear about your future work too. That sounds like it's going to be a great set of information to contrast and compare, and the similarities and differences to find that out. That'll be a great contribution.
And again, from where I stand with my knowledge at the moment, there is going to be a core of similarities. I'm hypothesizing that there's going to be a core of similarities, but there's obviously going to be differences. Both as a group of people and on an individual basis. And what we need to do is tap into. I've always had this notion that rather than just having a particular type of treatment and say that's the way it is for everyone, or even that's the way it is for women and that's the way it is for men, we need to develop a toolkit of treatment that we can assess the victims and then think, well, there's maybe 2 or 3 that might fit here, and then present them to the victim and say, what do you want to try first? What feels comfortable with you? How do you think you want to do this? Again, giving agency back to that person to manage their own guided recovery and hopefully growth and thriving.
It's kind of like, in some ways, that's similar to job placement agencies. Like you go to, here in the States, a lot of them are called temp agencies, and you go in and you tell them what skills you have. And, you're not going to go in with a spectrum of construction-related skills, and they're going to place you as a secretary somewhere.
No.
And it's, I think similarly, if you go, look at this kind of situation, domestic violence and the spectrum of types of violence that are faced between partners, people in codependent situations and stuff like that. They're going to end up in the long run doing something similar where the person with needs goes in and says, this is the spectrum of issues I'm facing, and they look at what things have helped with those issues with other people in the past, and they start giving you options. This is what we can do, what will help you the most, and what looks what looks comfortable.
Yeah, and I also think there needs to be a gambit of treatment, from medication, talking therapies, walking therapies, peer mentoring, that we just need to expand our ideas of what is needed for recovery, and just allow someone to be able to, for on Facebook, I follow a group called Mountains for Minds, and they're a group of people. They don't meet up, but they've got this page on Facebook, and there's people there that have been through really, really horrible trauma, or even just a breakup, where they're getting over stuff, and they'll go and walk up a mountain and share their pictures and share how they're feeling and all the rest of it. And that really helps that group of people. But it's not something that you could necessarily go to someone and say, I quite like hanging out on mountains. Anyone know what I can do? But we should be able to have a directory that says, there's a group here that deals with depression like this. There's a group that deals with trauma like that. We've got medication if you need that in order to overcome this. We've got talking therapy that can help you with that. Or we've got a group of people that are peer mentors that act like, in my head, like your kind of Big Brother program that you have in America. Mm-hmm. So you would have someone that, or even like an AA mentor, you would have someone that's gone through something like that, and they would just phone you up and say, so what have you done today, mate? Do you want a hand with something? Or, just someone to encourage you to get out of bed in the morning or something. Yeah. But there's such a wide range of things that we can explore. And again, current narrative is completely limited that because of the way it handles it.
Yeah, it definitely has. It's put us in a situation where it's very difficult to advocate for new solutions or expanding solutions or altering what's being done now. But I think, like I said, the more research that we see coming out that indicates that there's more information available, and some of it contradicts what we've already been operating on as a society, and that we have evidence to show that there is a reason to change. The bigger body of evidence we get like this, the better, because then it helps to sort of bring about that change and get people to recognize what's working and what's not. So I think I'm very grateful for you coming on, or to you for coming on. That's COVID fog right there.
Well, you've done really well.
It's been a good night, actually, in terms of for the listeners, my symptoms hit on Monday, and on Monday it was really bad, and I've been on medication since Monday. On Monday, I couldn't go up 4 steps on the stairway without getting out of breath. I went up and down the stairs 4 times before the show, bringing things to my desk to work with that I needed. and did not get out of breath until after the fourth time. So it's not too bad, but I still keep getting, like, every so often my head is just, not where it should be. But in any case, back to the statement, I'm really glad you came on to talk to us about this, because this is an incredibly valuable tool for the men's movement and for any of our listeners. I'm really glad that we were able to share it. Like I always say, information is power. It's power because of what a valuable tool it is. But in any case,
this isn't going to stay. This isn't going to stay in the dusty annals of academia.
Yeah.
There's going to be a website that will, and I've literally bought the domain name, the Male Victim Study.
So is it themalevictimstudy.org?
It will be .com.
Okay. I'm gonna.
We've got a backer, so it's going to be something that will evolve.
Okay.
We'll have videos, little clips. We'll have nice graphs. Stuff. There will be resources on there that anyone can just take and put into a presentation. So you don't have to go through all the data or try and find all this. It's all laid out there for you.
So that's going to be like all one word, themalevictimstudy.com.
Yeah, and as soon as it goes live, I'll let you all know about it.
Okay, I'm putting it as a coming soon in our low bar, because that way, if people are listening to this in the future, they can check to see.
Oh, of course,
because this live stream will be up for a while, but repeating it so that it'll go out in we also do podcasts and stuff. So it's the Male Victim Study, all one word, .com.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
I wanted it to be called that because I want it to become part of the vernacular. I want it to be something that people go, oh, have you looked at the Male Victim Study, when they're looking at research, so that it's just so simple you can't forget it. And I've committed to repeat this around every 2 to 3 years, so that we can just keep building on this data. The analysis for this is on a rather tight deadline. We're starting this month now in January, and we hope it will be completed by the end of March. And I'm doing some really rigorous tests on this so that we can make sure it's completely robust.
Great. And we definitely are going to want to have you on again for future updates.
Fab.
So, yeah, this is actually really exciting. I know there's a lot of people that have been watching your work that are very excited to see this information come out, and it's quite a treasure trove of new information, and hopefully it'll help increase the ability of our society in the long run to help victims of abuse, to help perpetrators of abuse, and to reduce the incidence of abuse overall. But in the meantime, we probably ought to call it. We've got a pretty long sausage.
Absolutely.
And I haven't even gotten into the super chats yet.
Oh my God.
We don't have a buttload of them, but we do have some. So I wanted to go back and read those, starting with a couple hours ago. Meredith Glassberg gave us $5 and said, wishing everyone a better 2021. Looking forward to seeing where Deborah's research leads us. And I think we all are. And I think that in and of itself is like one of the best Christmas gifts, is having this come out and having you doing this work and being able to examine it and talk about it and everything.
It's an absolute pleasure.
So
you guys have been so supportive from the very beginning, so it's an absolute pleasure.
No, I'm very glad. Very glad. And going on, we have Hoki Bukisa gave us $10 and said, good image search, Google image search, coercive control. It's all men controlling women. That's Google for you. You look at Google and it's all bias all the time anymore. Hopefully as more information comes out, they're not going to be able to get away with that.
No.
It'll become so ridiculous that they will just look stupid doing it, and they'll have to stop. Darth Sonic gave us $5 and said, Hannah is back! And I expect to see your cute badger rump at the next Cards Against Humanity night. I hope so. I've been...
You have a Cards Against Humanity night. We played that on Christmas Day. It's fantastic.
Yep.
Yes.
As part of the Badger patron group, we get together on Tuesday nights after, like a little bit after HBR news, in the the main group chat that you have, like, the majority of the patrons are in. That is usually about an hour to 2 hours long, Cards Against Humanity night, and I do try to participate as much as possible. I've been out for a bit because of medical issues, not all related to COVID. I caught COVID helping a family member get through a medical issue that was not COVID related, but we caught COVID at a hospital here in Ohio. So she caught it and I caught it from her. So there we go. But in any case, we do that every Tuesday. So, and hopefully,
I might gate crash that one night.
You must. You absolutely must. You're welcome anytime.
Yeah, it's really good fun. Very.
We're all assholes.
Yes.
I'll fit right in then.
There we go. Let's see. Then we have Darth Sonic 413 gave us another $10 and said, when Deb said, "So I went to counseling," due to her accent, I thought she said, "So I went to canceling."
No, that's not my style.
There we go. If I have my timelines right, y'all might be hosting the inventor of cancel culture. There we go. Heard it here first. There we go. Domestic abuse is canceled.
Yeah.
Darth Sonic gave us another $20 and said, if you look at the material that hardcore feminists consumes, at least those who don't pretend to enjoy amorphous Tumblr blobs, those who are flat anti-sex, they do seem to pine after the dominant patriarchy. Well, that's why they're all in for that 50 Shades of Grey novel, if you can call it that.
I found that fascinating that the vast majority of them, clearly the books went to women.
Oh, yeah.
But what was also bizarre is that the films were released on Valentine's Day.
So obviously they had to be going with their partners.
Yeah, they went on a date.
I just can't. I don't know.
I know.
So
it's beyond belief, isn't it?
I don't know the full story in that novel because I can't stand the writing.
It's crap, isn't it? It's so bad.
Yeah, and I like my type of book. Usually there's the scary monster is not also the sex object or the sex object's former sex partner. Once in a while, it's the main character's former sex partner is the scary the scary monster, but and it's about defeating the past. But I usually like I'm a Stephen King fan, or I'm a fan of some sci-fi, a lot of like whimsical stuff. I read a lot of the Piers Anthony Xanth novels. I sort of shied away a little bit from Piers Anthony for a while after reading, I think it was Firefly, bugged the shit out of me. But there were other issues there. But in any case, those kind of things I like, the Lord of the Rings, that kind of stuff. Like, you get me a book like 50 Shades of Grey, I'm not gonna really, I won't get bored. It's just gonna spend the whole time I read it annoyed and critiquing every little thing about it. It's just not my kind of story.
No.
So there needs to be, It sounds like there's not really much of a real story to that book. It's just
it's just titillation, isn't it? It's nothing.
Yeah. If I want that, I'm just gonna watch porn.
Yeah, exactly.
I hate to be real about it, but that's the fact. And
yeah.
So, and there might not even be any women in it. But in any case, going on, Darth Sonic gave us, which one did I miss? Okay, yeah, gave us $5 and said, so they promote anger in women. I finally figured it out. I cracked the code. Feminism is a plot to create a Sith lady harem. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it, actually. I actually like that description quite a bit. It would be one where the Sith ladies do not know they are Sith. A lot of them.
Yeah.
I think feminism is quite full of Sith. Howard Schoonover gave us $20. This is a weird one. It came out $20.21. And said, Happy New Year! 2021 will bring quality at last. We're all screwed. So I didn't even know we were playing that game. And the guys from Game Night will understand that one. Richard Bier gave us $1.99 and said, "Bring Deborah into the cult." Yeah, definitely. You gotta have Deborah in there for Game Night, because that would be awesome. But I think that's the end of our super chats. And I think it's gonna have to be the end of our show. It's 10:30 here. So for everybody who is already past the midnight hour, Happy New Year. And for everybody who hasn't passed the midnight hour quite yet, also Happy New Year. Just coming up. And thanks guys for coming on with me for New Year's Eve. I actually hadn't thought about the holiday when I initially wanted to schedule this tonight, and then I thought about it and I thought, what better way to break in the new year than with new information from new research. So there we go. And thanks to everybody who stuck it out with us and listened to us on New Year's Eve. Thanks to everyone who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. And good night, all.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. Bye.
Android activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.